You said you're ready for sure?
Yeah, ready.
Okay,
100%.
cool. All right, so as you guys can probably see, we are doing it like a little bit different this week. We're like doing it on an actual Discord call. So it's gonna be the quality. We're gonna like figure out the audio and post. But it'll be totally fine. The vibes are always better when it's kind of a little unprofessional anyway. But yeah, we are here today with Asmon. And the big topic of today is just gonna be, well, BlizzCon just happened. WoW is looking to be in a pretty good spot. Both classic and retail got like really hype announcements, and we're just going to spend the next little bit with no real time constraint, just kind of going over that, chopping it up and seeing how people feel about the announcements, go over some specific things, and just kind of see where WoW is going. So I think Asmon, you know everyone here, right? I think we don't need to like introduce anybody. We're good.
Oh,
you know
absolutely. I know all you guys 100%. You know, Dorki, Dratenos, I've seen many of your videos before over the years. And so, Max, I mean, you know, you and I know each other relatively well. And so, yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
so
thanks for coming on.
All right, number one question to you guys is WoW back?
Well, it depends on who you ask, right? I think the truth is that like if you because like you brought up classic, right? For an example. For classic, I think that WoW never left. Like people have been playing hardcore like intensively now for like what, 3 or 4 months? It's been crazy. Especially like recently there's been like a streamer guild and everybody's been trying to level up for that. So like there have been people that have been excited about WoW for actually quite a while now. Like if you look at the directory placement on the entire like Twitch page, it's actually quite healthy and quite good. But the real question here is retail back? And I think that it's as close to back as they realistically could have done. Like the announcements, like for people who weren't happy with the announcements, I think that a lot of them, I mean, they're not wrong to have the opinions they do, but I don't necessarily think that they would be as realistic, right? And like for me, I kind of wanted like a full world reset. Yeah, of course that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But, you know, I'm happy with what we're getting. That's what I think.
I think WoW's been back.
For me,
oh, go ahead, Dorki.
Go ahead, Jonas. No, you first.
All right, I'll do it. I think it's been back since 9.1.5. Actually, I think the game has actually been back. It's been like trending in the right direction, and it's just kind of taken a while for all of that to really start. Like a lot of that took several years of like ramping up, right? But you could tell with 9.1.5 that they were like, all right, we're abandoning some of the philosophy of early Shadowlands, of late BFA, right? And we're going to start doing this differently. And right, Dragonflight, we saw a lot of that happen. And I think that the World Souls Saga, the 11.0, 10, 12.0 stuff, like the features they've announced, like Warbands, for instance, right? Just making everything account wide is just, it's such a different thing than what they would have done with the Shadowlands philosophy, right? The early Shadowlands philosophy.
It's the exact opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like that. We're on the same team now, right? It's no longer like we go on these podcasts.
The devs.
Exactly, right? And we would just do these things where we're like, hey, we want this, but they'll never do it. Now it's like, hey, we want this, and they're like, yeah, right, that's a technical difficulty. We'll do it for next expansion, right? We'll get it in there, but you know, that's gonna be fun. If that's what the players want, that's what we're gonna do. So I think WoW has been back, and now we're starting to feel it.
I think that you're probably right.
All right, Dorki,
the way I see Dragonflight and even War Within, they feel like healing expansions. They feel like they don't really bring anything too big, bring anything new, any real way to capture what players have wanted in this game. But it does do a really good job at alleviating the problems that we've had in the past 3 expansions, particularly the whole AP grind, the amount of bullshit weeklies and dailies we had to do. Because if you think about it, in Dragonflight, there's like really none of this. It's really strange. Like I would log into the game. There's no dailies. There's no weeklies. You just go do PvP or M+ or raid. But it sort of feels formulaic in a way. It doesn't feel like there's anything that really captures players and gets them wanting to do something other than M+ PvP or raid. But if you enjoy M+ PvP or raid, I mean, you're gonna love whatever Dragonflight or even War Within has to offer. Now, I mean, we are going to go into it a little bit with the whole delves and the warbands, etc. Hopefully that will change things up. But right now, the way I see it, it's been a healing expansion, but it's not something that particularly draws in new players or players who have quit in the past for specific reasons, like whether they don't like retail, they don't like M plus, they don't like raid. It's just very different from classic WoW.
It's
Well,
definitely an
yeah.
expansion that's for retail players.
Well,
Right.
yeah. So I think Dranos, I think you were really right about the like philosophy change. And I think right before 9.5 was like probably the lowest that WoW has been in. So like they were almost forced into that. But
Yeah.
Shadowlands was like I think the most popular release in like many years, and they totally failed in what we wanted at that time. So I think for a lot of people that was a like last straw. That was, I'm kind of done with this. And like you said, it's so funny. You mentioned 9.5. Almost no one even remembers it was 9.5 because so many people stopped playing that they didn't even realize that they made those changes or had those thoughts until 9.2 because that was how off of the game people were.
Yeah, they're
And
just playing another game at that point. They're playing Final
yeah,
Fantasy at
exactly.
the time.
Yeah, and then Dragonflight, like you said, is a healing expansion. I even been talking to developers, they kind of say that like, this expansion isn't intended to have the highs of like, corruption when it was at its best, or essences, or the
Yeah.
Legion legendaries at the end of the expansion, or the artifact weapon system, or any of that, because they're not trying to. They're spending all of that developer resources making the base game better, right? Like UI improvements, total
Talent.
overhaul of the talent system. Yeah, the just professions, everything, just base things that will sustain for the rest of WoW. So when you refer to it as a healing expansion, I've never heard anyone say that, but they are kind of just like, hey, let's like stop making content for a bit and let's just like make sure the base game is like actually good or getting better. So I think generally speaking, anytime you were to play the expansion after that, it would be a really good place, because if they go back into trying to like really innovate with a better base game, then like obviously if you would take some time off, that would be a great time to come back regardless of anything else. And then I think another thing about it is, man, Chris Metzen's a fucking rock star, man. That guy, like, man, he obviously had some great announcements, but man, there was even just like almost 2 minutes there where he wasn't even really saying anything, but he was just hype. People were just wanted to see
Yeah.
him back. They associate Chris Metzen with like the good times of WoW. And I definitely, and we'll get into this more with the World Soul Saga in a bit, but that's also what I don't think it's a coincidence that he wanted to do a full 3x pack thing, because I think the 3x packs from Classic to Wrath was a fully fleshed out story that they kind of knew where they were going before the game came out, and they spent that time perfecting it, and people really bought into all of that. And I don't think that's happened in a very long time, and I think he wants to recapture that feeling.
It's kind of like Legion, you think about like Legion was kind of the end of like the core Warcraft story, right? You're beating Sargeras. Sargeras was like the ultimate evil of Warcraft 3, like the overarching evil, and we actually beat him in Legion. And I think like that was another reason why Legion was very popular, is that it's like it's bringing back like all the greatest hits of like the main characters, right? You've got Illidan, you've got Kil'jaeden, and Sargeras, and all of these other characters, and you're going to Argus, which is a planet like Turalyon, even for like more old school players, Alaria. So I think that really you're right that they're kind of trying to bring back that sense of people getting excited and anticipating the next expansion, because whenever Burning Crusade was out, like I think Max, you started playing in Wrath, right?
I started playing I was like a turbo casual looking at like 6K gear scores in Dalaran, doing like
Yeah.
pugs. Yeah, at the very end of Wrath, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, like whenever BC was out at the time, and like a lot of people can probably attest to this, because like everybody knew that Arthas was coming. Everybody knew that the Lich King was coming. So whenever it finally hit and the cinematic happened, I remember like I was on vacation and my friend called me on like my little flip phone, and like people are just going crazy about it, because it was like the build up and like the payoff to that was so big. And I think that's what they're trying to recapture with this. And I also think that really, I mean, let's be honest, like you're talking about like 9.15. Well, that was, I think, a response primarily to Final Fantasy too. And I think really look at the success of Endwalker and Shadowbringers. And like one thing that they did is they created like this massive cohesive story that they brought forward over like 8 or 10 years. So I think Warcraft is trying to do that as well. And, like there's some other like secondary interviews where they were comparing what they kind of wanted to do with obviously the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, I think you see a lot of people trying to emulate that in like their IP in one way or another.
Yeah. Where do you guys want to start? There's so much to unpack about the announcements, and I think we're going to primarily stick to retail, but we'll certainly have to get to Season of Discovery because I think where it's going from there is super important. Dratnos, did you have anywhere you wanted to begin?
Yeah, I mean, I already kind of brought it up a little bit, but Warbands, the account-wide everything feature, I think is kind of the biggest home run. There was the biggest applause at BlizzCon on that
Yeah.
one. So I feel like that one is just it's very hard to find somebody who's suspicious of that, right? It's all clearly going to be good, but it seems like such a great step to. It's also kind of that thing you were talking about, Max, about making the core something they can build on. If they have this Warbands feature ready, just any future tech they come up with can now be account wide easily, and
it's not like you're gonna have to get essences and then be like, oh wait, it turns out again we've forgotten to make them account wide. We have to go back and fix that. If you start the game and approach it from your account is an account is just that whole thing from the beginning, you don't ever have to make it a singular character experience and then broaden that out to other characters. And I was actually initially concerned when I heard it, because when I hear Warbands, I think Lost Ark, because I think it's
roster.
largely very similar to Roster and Lost Ark, but how that interacted with that game, very very different game design. But that was when I think of Lost Ark stuff, I think you are doing a ton of stuff on your alts to make your main bigger, and that was that's terminal. Like that would be so bad if that was the case in this game. But I believe they said that is they immediately dispelled that, and it's gonna purely be for how you progress with reputation and stuff like that.
I think one of
they did.
the sleeper things in here is the Warbound until equipped stuff, which is you kill a boss that drops eye level 590 stuff, and previously you would just get that on your main, right? But now you can also get random extra 577 Warbound until equipped drops, right? And send those over to your alts. So it kind of solves that problem they've had where people want account-wide stuff. They want to be able to get heroic gear and then send it to their alts. And now they basically have a tech that lets them drop normal gear you can send to your alts from heroic bosses, right? Or whatever the gap they want to end up being. So you can actually send your alt over a kit of gear from your main, which is something people want for a long time. But it doesn't actually have to be that high eye level that Blizzard doesn't want you to be able to farm, from your main to your alt. So I think that's sleeper going to be the best part of this.
Is that what it is? My initial impression was it was something where you just transferred, say, one of those account bound gear.
No, they talked about
your alts.
They talked about the Warbound until equipped being a special bonus drop that you could get from bosses where
and it would be lower Garrosh weapons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like Garrosh weapons.
Yeah.
It's exactly like Garrosh weapons.
Exactly same tech
that sounds pretty cool.
With an eye level down, but I know they didn't say exactly how much, but I'm assuming it's 1 or 2 difficulty steps, which I mean, that sounds perfect, right? You spin up a new alt and it sucks to be in those auction house greens, but it is nice to be able to get that progression experience. It would just be nice to start from a little bit further up if you could send over some items.
I'm very much an advocate of making things account wide. This is going to sound like a super hot take, but I'd be completely okay if all gear was account wide.
Because I actually said the exact same thing, by the way.
Yeah, I think back to Diablo 3, right? And I remember I got a really badass item for a wizard, and I went and I made a wizard. Or I got a really badass item, I think, for a witch doctor too. I got that 2-handed axe and original D3, and I used that and I made the character. And so I think that really having to have gear progression for each character is totally fine. I'm not really gonna mind that as much. And I think that really what people are applauding for with the Warbands particularly isn't really not having to re-gear. That's actually just just completely on the top bonus, because the Garrosh weapons were awesome, right? So I think the main reason is because people don't like having to farm out Renown 2 times, or having to farm out there are all these systems. I think a good example of this is the tower knowledge in Torghast. I actually thought progressing and doing the tower knowledge in Torghast was pretty fun the first time, but I don't want to do it on alt ever. And so I think there's a lot of systems like that are the first time going through it, it feels relatively good. Withered Army training back in Legion, for example, right? Those types of things were just fun to do once, and then that's it. And they end up being these systems end up being barriers to entry for people wanting to play alts.
Yeah, I've felt the same way about the whole account-wide gearing too. I mean, that's a super hot take, and that's something that a lot of MMO players would not want, but BDO does it, and Final Fantasy does this, and it's so nice when you can actually share your gear across characters. At least like some gear, There is a lot of times where I farm like a really rare trinket from raid, and I'm like, man, having to get this gear on like all my characters is kind of annoying. But I can understand why people enjoy having to gear up alts because like that's part of their way of playing another character is just like
Yeah.
another form progression. I could definitely see that. But for me personally, just because I'm a competitive player, I prefer just having like, all right, if I've gotten my trinket, I would prefer to just have it on all my characters. But it's also very problematic because it probably encourages a lot of degenerate behavior, like players just trying to farm the trinket on all their alts and then trying to get it for their entire account. I'm sure it probably causes a lot of issues, which
Well,
makes it hard to implement.
I think with gearing in general, I just think in MMOs always, anytime you're doing something for the second time, whether that's something in a season or like just in general leveling a character, I think that anytime you do that a second time, it should be significantly faster, if not in some ways directly transferring, because there is no like there's nothing redeeming about doing something like if you're within a season you're trying to gear a character, you actually, that's what WoW does differently with loot than other games. They get the feeling of, oh, this thing dropped and you feel great, right? Like you mentioned
Yeah.
Final Fantasy. In Final Fantasy, gear is a total means to an end, right? They're not trying to accomplish that, but they're trying to make it more targetable and acquirable. But in that way, it's also less epic. So in WoW, if you're going through that experience, sometimes that means it's going to take longer to get what you want. But when you're about to log in at the middle of a season, you've played everything on your main as much as you're going to do. A lot of the times, what it's meant in WoW is, oh, I would play an alt, but the amount of effort I would have to put in to get that alt to where I'd want it to be to play it is enough for me to not play it at all. And you actually just stop playing the game entirely. You're done playing the season. So they've done a good job of like sending stuff over, but the Warband thing and Warbound until equipped gear could definitely be one of the best ways to like be like, oh man, you know what? I've actually acquired enough of this where I could log on this like new max level character I have, and I can just like immediately be doing content I want to do, and I don't have to do all of the grind that's kind of monotonous.
It's a good way to test the waters.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll always remember like the season we all liked in BFA, the end season, 8.3. But I remember before they made it so that you could catch up on the corruption resist, it was like June, and I was looking at making an alt, and I was like, oh man, if I want to push high keys on this thing and catch up on corruption resist, it's going to take me until November, and every single week I'm going to have to do a horrific vision and kill N'Zoth on some difficulty. And I was just like, I'm not going to do that, right? And that, I think, is a common experience of the worst parts of the Legion, BFA, and Shadowlands systems, is that you would often have this experience of like, I want to play this alt. Oh no, I have to do this. All right, I'm not going to do it, right? And this is like the exact opposite of that.
I think the devs need to just like be honest with themselves and be honest with the players and be like, why do you like playing alts? Well, people don't like playing alts so they can refarm the horrific vision corruption resistance, like you said. People like playing alts because they want to do Mythic Plus on another type of character. Maybe they want to get better gear and, improve that character, which is like, it is a counterpoint to like, making all gear account wide. And I think that really just like looking at why players want to play alts and then making that road as clean as possible is the best thing for them to do. So it's like, if people don't like refarming something, then just make it to where they don't have to refarm it. I don't see why that's a problem.
Oh yeah. And also, last thing about Warbands that I think is sick.
Yeah.
And it is just the roster page. Just seeing your characters like chilling in your starting screen is fucking sick. That just
I love it.
Really, really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope they do
That's
like
a
what
huge change.
Lost Ark does, where you can like unlock different backgrounds based off of different activities you can do in game.
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, I mean, especially like aspirational content too. Like if they just make it so like, oh, if you time, all 25 keys, if you get clear mythic raid, if you do delves or something, just like give players a reason to chase after these.
There's like a frozen
cosmetic
throne
rewards.
one or something like that with like your main character sitting on the frozen throne. That'd be bad.
Yeah, that would actually be sick.
Oh yeah, put that as like a 2% drop from Lich King, and then everybody's going back and farming it again.
People to go back. Yeah.
Although
hopefully it's not in the store. That'd be the worst case.
I bet they would do some store ones as well if they did this, but
They
I'd be
may
fine with that.
do it.
I don't know. Yeah. The fact you also can go back and just get any transmog now as well, that's like another one of the sleeper best parts of this, right? Just go back on your play character and get cloth and leather mog, because it felt so bad when you'd get the good mogs on the wrong characters and you're like, no.
Wait, I
it's like
forgot
can't
that's
use it.
being done. That's being retroactively done, right? Like everything you have on your whole account, you can wear
Yeah,
on
so I guess
any
maybe
armor
if you're
type?
holding on to it, I don't know. I'm just not going to go back until
It's
11.0.
probably like, do you remember back whenever they did it in Legion and like you had to log on every character and then it would just apply them all? I think that's probably what's going to happen
Yeah.
because they did before. Because like, what are they gonna? They're not probably gonna have a record of like, oh, you looted this on December 7th, 2015, right? So it'll probably just be from like everything in your inventory and going forward. But can you actually transmog everything?
No,
Or
I think I
yeah, I was
misspoke
about
about
to
that. I
say.
think it's collect. So like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah,
a
collect. Yeah, that's what
if
I
you're a
thought.
cloth where you can collect plate loot, but you can't
Yeah.
transmog into plate loot. Yeah.
Mhm.
I wonder if you
Yep.
can go back and like item restore the stuff you've sold from your old Mog runs, and if it's still in there, then you can maybe get
Try an
that
item
going.
restore like Tusk of Manaroth you get on a
Yeah,
mage.
yeah, on your
Yeah.
mage, yeah.
All right, so another thing I think the main system change they're announcing, and you knew they were gonna have to do something like this because they did talents as expansion and the whole point was evergreen, right? If they spent this whole
Mhm.
expansion balancing and optimizing and tuning these talent trees just to add 4 more rows of them, that would kind of throw out the whole evergreen thing. That would literally be like borrowed
Yeah.
power, right? You'd be gaining and losing talents. So they decided to go like the hero talent thing, which I think is basically what that is. It's giving you different talent options on top of the talents you already have, but it's also incorporating a heavy dose of theme and class fantasy for sure. So my question to you guys is, what was your reaction to the announcement of that as a system and like the potential of that? And then also a side thing, what is the favorite name of these subclasses that they announced?
I'll be honest. This is clearly just like PoE ascendancies, right? And
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
they're awesome. I love them. Like for example, in PoE, like you can be a marauder, and then a marauder can be like a juggernaut, which is obviously exactly what it sounds, or a chieftain, which is like a fire shaman, basically. And these are totally different things, totally different themes, and you can unlock them by just like leveling up. I think the ascendancies are awesome, and like the mountain thane thing is really cool. Now, one thing I'm the most excited about, the one that I'm really, really curious about, is the Rider of the Apocalypse with the
Yeah.
Death Knight. Because you remember the Death Knights in Warcraft 2 were always on a mount. So are they going to add
yeah.
like a mounted Death Knight class, like the original Warcraft 2 Death Knights? Because if they're not, they should.
I don't know if they're going to do that gameplay wise, but Rider of the
Yeah,
Apocalypse is unassailably the best name of all of those things. That is
I
fucking
know.
insane.
It's a
Yeah.
shame as well because it looks like that's probably the Frost Unholy run, right? You can't, it's because Blood
It's
is probably
gotta be.
Sand Lane and
Yeah.
Deathbringer. Yeah, so tragedy for us Blood DKs out there.
Mhm.
hmm
I'm a big fan of Archon and Templar. It's a little bit basic, but
Yeah.
it sounds pretty badass.
You liked StarCraft?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I love Archons.
I mean, I think people are gonna be more excited about this than just the gameplay element. That's why I think it's so exciting. Like when they
Yeah, it's very
announced so
thematic.
so covenants are largely reviled because of the accessibility to
Implementation.
them and the implementation and the
Yeah.
ability to swap them and the choice and all of that. They totally missed on, and maybe a long time ago something like covenants would have worked. But like now totally did not work. But it incorporated a heavy element of theme. Like people really wanted to be a Kyrian paladin or just like a Necrolord DK or whatever.
Venthyr
Like
Warrior. That's what I want to be. Yeah.
yeah, and people are just like, this is like I identify with this and whatever. But then they totally mess it up with the way you worked with this. So I think just as much as it is ascendancies, it's also just like the feeling of being like almost a subclass, I guess is what it's been referred to. And like what that actually feels and looks like, and the ability to swap them right away, I think is going to bring a lot of people back. Because like Shadowlands was super popular at the beginning, and that may have been COVID and some other reasons, but I also think that the idea of covenants, just even aesthetically, just people fucking love that, and I think this is getting the good parts of that as well as some really good gameplay too.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think Shadowlands, like, people were very unhappy about Shadowlands, but you have to remember that, like, the first month or two of Shadowlands, I'm going to say it, I thought it was pretty good. I had a lot of fun. Like, PvP was really good. Castle Nathria was fun. And, like, at that point, everybody, like, yeah, the Covenants were a drag and you still had the conduit energy and that sucked too. But I enjoyed myself a lot in the first 2 months. It was the problem that it just kind of kept going on after that. Because yeah, like people love the theme and like the vibe that the Covenants brought, especially the ones that were like much more kind of like I feel like Necrolord and Kyrian. Like they weren't really as exciting to me, maybe as like the Venthyr or like the Arden Wheeled ones. But like I think also the fact that there's probably people that are disagreeing with me about that in chat implies that all of them were good in a way.
I
Yeah,
think
and
the
Go ahead,
impressive thing about the Covenants as well, right? Like, is that was from scratch, right? They didn't have like 12 years of Warcraft lore looking back at it. Like they whipped up all of Shadowlands completely kind of untethered from Warcraft, and that was one of the
Yeah.
problems it had thematically. But what it means is that if they're doing this now with all of these hero specs, and many of them are actually based off of like Warcraft 3 characters and, you know, TBC characters, right? And like all this stuff, like they have the incredible storytelling and theming that they had with Shadowlands, but they actually have a base that already resonates with people, right? Like Dark Ranger, we already know what we want that to be, right? We already have a vibe we're aiming for on that.
That is a Dark Ranger is the #1 name on the tier list for people bat chesting. That is that is an enormous bat chest class. Yeah, and I think just to kind of tie that up, what I was saying, when you look at what people play expansions for, like a lot of the time they're like it's the right time of year, and maybe they want to get back into WoW, or you know, but they're never gonna like look at BFA and be like, oh, I wasn't gonna play BFA, but they have Azerite armor, and that's cool, so I'm gonna play because of that. They didn't do that, right? So, but what they are gonna do in this next expansion, I think, is maybe you don't want to be a you don't want to like log in and see the new system, but you might want to play just because you can be a Dark Ranger, or just because you can be a Rider of the Apocalypse, or a Templar, or an Archon, or whatever. And people are going to, that wouldn't have otherwise played, are going to play because they can be this thing. And I think that's an excellent, like really smart mix of like what looks to be really cool gameplay decisions, plus also like really getting into what people really care about when they play WoW.
It's like Demon Hunters.
Except Demon Hunter. I think the Demon Hunter ones are rough, right? I think.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, I mean, like the Demon Hunter, like adding Demon Hunter into the game caused people to want to come back inside out.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
And
they are
another
also
stuff.
Ironically, the
weaker
Demon Hunter
ones.
ones are
Boring.
lame.
Yeah.
They're so lame. Yeah.
It's Aldrachi Reaver and Fellscarred, which are I don't know how you get like one that's just like I'm Illidan in there, but that's got that they need to do that, right?
Yeah, like if you look at like how people who play this class, no doubt people who play Death Knights and Demon Hunters are by far the edgiest people of all of the people who play class. It's not close.
Yeah, they're the
And
ones
how-
with the anime profile pictures.
So how do you not make one like the Betrayer, or like just some crazy?
Yeah, I was gonna say
like,
the Betrayer. That's
some shit that'll have them like wearing a blindfold around their house.
Yeah.
You know, like they need something like that.
So the real question is though, how class defining would you guys want these hero talents to be? Like, would you want your class to be completely different if you were a Dark Ranger versus wherever the hell the other ones were? Because I don't feel like these are that class defining, are they? I'm not too sure.
I think that it shouldn't be. I don't think that they should have like a percentage that they're going for. And I think for some of them, they should be extremely class defining. And for other ones, they should just be like a little bit of flavor. And that way players can choose which one they want to have. And it also doesn't feel formulaic. I hope some are class changing and class defining though.
I do think they've bitten off a big challenge here, right? Where it's like, I mean, especially the fact that some of these hero specs are shared between like Keeper of the Grove, for instance, is shared between Balance and Resto Druid. And that is going to be it's going to be a very difficult balancing knob to land properly to make it so that Keeper of the Grove Resto and Keeper of the Grove Balance are both good, but not too good, right? And like, you know, and then if you nerf Keeper of the Grove for one that's okay, is the other now too bad? Or if you nerf Resto because Keeper of the Grove is too good, is their other one now too bad, right? Like that's going to be a difficult thing to do, but I don't feel the same sense of like doom about all of the different Covenant spec combos with this one, where I feel like they could actually land it, especially because the passives they've chosen, like they are primarily passive buffs that you're looking at on these trees,
almost
and
exclusively.
You do unlock the entire tree, right? And then there's like a couple of choice nodes in there, but it's not like we're looking at a tree of just 4,000 different options that they're trying to balance here. Like I think they have taken an ambitious balancing task on their hands, but I don't feel like it's impossible like I did with Covenant balancing.
Also, talent trees are good. I mean, the talent trees are infinitely larger than these, and they did all of that. And I think that, I don't know about everybody, I'm happy with my talent tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, you're right. This expansion, they released a bunch of talent trees, and they've been, because I know you haven't been playing it as much recently, but you know
Yeah.
they have been reworking, you know, a few specs and a few classes trees every, you know, like 0.5, 0.7, 0.0 patch. And the new ones are like monumentally better from the old ones. So the reason why
Really?
I have,
Wow.
yeah, so the ones they're reworking are, I guess, giving a fresh coat of paint. You can tell that upon all of those class designers collaborating and working on a bunch of different classes, they're gathering ideas that really work, and they've made the ones they've touched really, really nice, up to the point where the classes that haven't been touched in a long time are like, damn, I kind of that'd be kind of good if they did that. But that gives me hope for this, because I think the task of balancing and creating these talent trees is infinitely more difficult than balancing and creating these smaller subclasses, just in the amount of pure buttons and things that are happening. They're more enhancements
Variables.
rather than the definition of the very definition of what you're doing in your class. And because of that, I hope they do it. I do wonder, do you guys think this is going to happen? So they are swappable. I mean, the big issue with Shadowlands was, oh, I want to be a Venthyr warrior, but like this thing's better, so I just have to play that. But wait, I can't, because I can't swap. That's weird, right? This is not going to have that issue. They said, I think they even went out of their way to say like these will be like unbelievably swappable. Like they'll swap without even you thinking about it, or some shit like that. Like it's crazy
Yeah.
easy. But do you worry about someone wanting to play Hunter because they want to be a Dark Ranger? They're like bat chesting out of their mind, and then they log in and Dark Ranger's dog shit, and they have to be a Beastmaster, whatever the other one was called, animal
Pack
companion. I don't know.
leader.
Pack leader,
That's
yeah.
I think that's yeah, that would suck. I mean, like I get that. And I feel like in general, I haven't really kept up with balance recently, but like I've seen a few charts and it doesn't really seem like it's awful. How is balance in raids now?
Raids is so it's super polarizing in Mythic Plus. And Mythic Plus, it's, you know, only 5
The
specs to be
god comp
there,
thing,
and
right? Yeah.
augmentation became like a huge problem. Raid is weird. So like at the end of 10.1, 0.5, or 0.7,
Mhm.
if you look at like a single target damage chart on Rashok, every class is within like a ridiculous, it might even be as close as it's ever been. It's really, and then like obviously this game has so
Yeah.
much cleave and AoE and all that stuff. I would say like raid balancing is very good. And Mythic Plus is always, but Mythic Plus is so weird. Like the God
And
comp
plus
thing
it's
is
a
a
mini game.
problem. Like
Wait.
the God comp thing is a problem, and this is the worst that's ever been. But like the reality is, because of selection bias in dungeons, like you're not ever going to get selected unless you're perceived to be one of the top things. And there's 39 specs, and only 5 of them can be in, and realistically only 10 or 11 are ever meta, because it's an infinitely scaling game mode. So if you're not happy with being average, which you're not, because average means not getting invited, by default 80% of the community is going to be mad permanently. So Mythic Plus is in a bad spot, but it's kind of like there's, no matter what you do with Mythic Plus, most people are going to be upset.
You're probably right, honestly. Yeah. It's like, how do you solve that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there's like a number of things, right? Like key depletion, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think that really if one of these ascendancy specs or subclasses, whatever you want to call it, aren't good, I think that Blizzard should just, I mean, realistically, they should try to make sure that the ones that people really want to play are good, you know, and then the other ones are just good for like more niche things, right? Or like, let's say if there's some weird demon hunter subclass that lets you farm transmogs really fast, okay, that's fine, right? But you know, if it's something like Dark Ranger, yeah, make sure that one's good.
Yeah, exactly. And they've actually, okay, it's funny, they actually have done that. So this has actually also been controversial, because everyone's just like, oh, what am I going to play this patch? Oh, maybe the new reworked thing. Because recently when they've reworked or worked on classes, they've been insanely powerful. In 10.5, the whole God comp thing, that was just 5 reworked, or like 4 reworked or rebuff classes, and they all just shot to the best class on their roll by far.
Well, look at
And
augmentation itself.
yeah, I mean, yeah, which has been nerfed
Yeah.
massively and is still super OP. Yeah. But one thing they've done, you know, this patch, like the community perception generally is that rogues and demon hunters are really good. They just recently got reworked. People think disc is really good. Disc just got reworked, right? They very clearly, in my opinion, I think these classes are like considered meta because they're also getting like a touch of paint, right? They're getting new synergies. They should be powerful, but I think Blizzard is intentionally making them powerful as well. And if you think about it, that leads into what you were just saying, and I think it's also smart. If you're trying to convince people to come back to 10.2 and you're telling people, oh, well, we just like reworked Rogue and Demon Hunter, and you know, so people, rogues and Demon Hunters might be like, oh, I might try that out. What would really suck is if they did and those classes were really bad and they actually couldn't play the game because they didn't get invited, and then they wouldn't, so like they're kind of backing
Yeah.
up what they're advertising. So I think what you're saying would probably be, if they know people want to play Dark Ranger, they'd be foolish to make it not good,
Exactly. And it's just like you could say that's fan service, but like at the end of the day, what's wrong with fan service? That sounds great.
Better than fan, not being serviced, which was all of BFA
But Shadowlands.
Shadowlands. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I do think
True.
that there was an era as well of the game where you heard your spec was getting a rework and it kind of filled you with some dread, right? You were like, are they going to kill my
Yep.
baby? Right? And it hasn't been like that in Dragonflight, and hopefully that does mean these hero specs. I mean, realistically as well, like if they just buff the ones that are bad as well, that's I mean, that's still a lot of work, but that's pretty doable, right? It's not like they can't do that because it'll mess up some other part of the game, which was the problem with like the Covenant balancing 400 different wheels that were all interlocked problem.
I feel like the amount of inner balancing they had to do, especially in Shadowlands, but also in BFA, it's crazy to see because obviously we don't have 17 different interconnected systems that have to function into 3 different end games. And like how much more content Dragonflight has had because of that. I feel like that's a big reason, is because they're not trying to microbalance all these different levers and knobs and pulleys against each other, and it's just a lot more direct and simple.
But at the same
Well-
time, that like
Mhm.
I wonder. Actually, I want to ask you this question. We had a podcast about this 2 weeks ago, and I don't want to bring up that entire conversation, but I'm pretty under the impression that if you keep making Dragonflights, which is like focusing on the core of the game, I don't know if they'll do that forever. Do you ever wonder if the excitement that existed at the end of BFA and the highs, like all these borrowed power expansions started out so rough, but at the end, when it finally all came together, and then again you lost it at the end of the expansion, had to relearn all those mistakes and stuff. But do you worry about WoW's highs never reaching that if they're not shooting as much or innovating as much as they did in those borrowed power expansions?
Well, you think about it even from the idea of an expansion itself. Like there is so much hype that goes into expecting and anticipating what the new expansion is going to be. And now that they've announced the next 2 or 3 of them, or 3 of them actually, there's no hype to do that because we know what it's going to be. So I do think that does dramatically change the way that people like view even the game on a meta level as a product itself. And in terms of the systems, I think that like at the end of Legion, it felt really, really good. And at the end of BFA, it felt really, really good. I think that having some borrowed power is okay, and it's not really a bad thing, but it just shouldn't be the tail that wags the entire dog. And I think that's kind of what happened in Legion and BFA and Shadowlands to maybe a bit of a lesser extent, but still. And also, I think that, like, how did you arrive at that being a problem? It's because players gave feedback, oftentimes in alpha or beta, with whether it was Shadowlands, Legion, or BFA, about these systems, and the feedback just wasn't applied. So I think that the systems themselves weren't necessarily the entire problem. It was the fixation on making the systems in a way that the developers wanted, rather than listening to the input from players.
Dorky, I cut you off earlier. What were you saying?
I was gonna go back into the hero talents, which is so when we were talking about how it might be adding too much it might be taking on too much. This was actually something me and Now talked about when we were doing the watch party, because like Now was afraid that like, wait, if they're adding this, aren't we just gonna add too much to the game? It feels like there might just be like more bloat to the game. Like if you think about it, you're adding an entire 10 hero talents. What exactly are they gonna do? Are you just gonna have classes that have more buttons? Are you gonna have classes that have more of like utilities and defensives? Because we've talked about this before, right? How some classes just have too much. Like a mage, for example, has like what 6, 7 defensives or some crazy ridiculous amount, and you have healers that have like multiple healing cooldowns. Is this just going to add more to it? And like obviously, they did say that like, oh, a lot of it's going to be passive, and it's going to be more like changing specific abilities rather than adding buttons. But even then, if by changing some buttons to be more impactful, you might just add extra utility or extra defensives or extra damage cooldowns to specific classes, and it might just be too much, which is like something that will be hard for them to take on.
Well, you compare it, right? I mean, like, here's a great example, I think, and this is, I think, what you're trying to say. Death Grip is really good, right? But Morphine's Grasp, that's effectively Death Grip on everything around. So it's like, yeah, that does kind of change the game.
Well, they've done this. History has repeated itself before. We've done this already. So you're like Dorki, you're saying this expansion starts, you're adding hero talents, but then what? Do you add a whole nother thing like that next expansion, and then you get into button bloat, and even if they're all passives and they're not actually buttons, it's just like a bunch of stuff. And then that's kind of what happened around like WoD and going into Legion, where they removed a lot of this stuff because that was happening throughout MoB, and they've done that. The same thing with raid buffs now, right? Like raid buffs have progressed to this point where they're like required and on every class except for one for some reason, and that was exactly the same in like BC, and then it went through, and then they eventually got rid of them, and then they added them again, right? So the reality is they probably are going to do something like that, and eventually just have to find another interesting way to like make your character stronger. Sorry, Dranos.
I do think they said, right, that hero talents were going to be these 3 expansions, right? But it's not like permanent after that. So
did they say that?
I think they said, or they said that they were leaving
they
the
said
option
something
for
along the
that.
lines of like,
Yeah.
they want to
Interesting.
leave it open for like,
right. So like obviously if we
certainty.
love them and we're like, no, you can't take this away, then they'll probably change their minds on that. But
I thought it was evergreen. I could be wrong. It'd be interesting to see them be awesome and people like being slayers, and then like it's just gone after 6 years. Which actually, speaking of 6 years,
so
do you guys think? What do you think, Dranos?
Well, we know it's so they said there was an interview actually with where they said it's set to conclude before 2030, right? We can't get into specifics, but yes, it will be faster. We want to ensure that players aren't completing this saga in 2030. Teams have been restructured to be able to create this whole saga, and all 3 expansions are being developed with a lot of stuff now in parallel that previously was not possible for them to do in parallel. So that doesn't mean we don't know exactly what that means on cadence, but if these expansions are a year and a half apart or a year apart, that would be a lot, and that would go a long way towards fixing that problem that you and we talked about several episodes ago, where these non-borrowed power expansions maybe have a little bit less longevity to them because we kind of run out of new stuff towards the end, and we don't have that epic awesome end of patch. But if it's just the first year of those expansions and then we're on to a new one, that could be pretty cool. But they haven't said exactly what they're going to be able to hit with that, and I assume that's because they have a target and they're not sure if they can hit it.
I think it also probably depends on how the players receive it, right? Because like I think it was like maybe about a year and a half ago, like Blizzard acquired, I think it was called a studio called like Spellbreak or something, and it had over 100 employees, and apparently a lot of, if not all of them, went on to the Warcraft team. So it makes sense that they're going to have way more people that are going to be able to make way more content. I know obviously faster expansions. Somebody says Proletariat. I think that actually might have been the name.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. And like faster expansions are like very much kind of like a double-edged sword for a lot of people, because it's like, oh yeah, I want faster expansions, but that also means that I have to pay money more often. So it's hard to really know. I think that the truth is that if the game is good and people feel like they're getting value out of the expansions and they're getting value out of the game, I don't think people are really going to give a shit about it.
I completely agree. There's been people dooming really hard. There's a lot of people like, oh, wow, $90 every year for a patch. But the way I see it is, if for every year you're getting 8 new dungeons, you're getting expansion-wide content, if you're getting like all these major features that you would get in an expansion, not a patch, I would not mind paying an extra, okay, $9 is a little bit extreme. Like, if anyone is pre-purchasing the biggest pack just for 3-day head start, I mean, that's something I guess we can talk about later, but
That is a topic later, yeah.
yeah, let's
can do
just
that now
say
if we want.
$50 a year.
Yeah.
Well, going back into this point, I would be completely down with having an expansion every year or year and a half if it meant getting content at a faster pace. Like, if they're putting in that much more work, then fuck it, just like give them more money. I mean, it's kind of like what Genshin Impact does, actually, unironically. Those guys, they make so much money that they're able to just pump out all these like content that their fans absolutely love. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's a reality.
Honkai Star Rail is the same way. They're like making new cinematics all the time. They're adding new content constantly. They're doing new stuff. And it's the power of anime waifus, but at the end of the day, it makes a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
fucking money.
yeah, and the whole like gacha thing.
And
Yeah,
people don't complain because they feel like the money is going back into the game. And people do complain, but there is that defense that it's like, well, at least, our money is going towards something. Because I think that, like with Shadowlands, especially towards the end of like 9.0, people are like, okay, well, where the fuck is our sub money going? Where's the new content?
So
Right.
I think one thing that we can kind of transfer into this, like how long is this going to be? Is it going to be 18 months or whatever? I think 18 months, it sounds like from that interview, is like almost, at least starting with the next expansion, is almost a guarantee. Because it would just, if they did the normal 2-year cycle they've been doing for 10 years, it would just be over 2030, and that would just, so that's not their plan at the moment, at least. And I think generally I'd be okay with that, but I just kind of want to talk about content pacing this expansion, what you guys would want to see in a new expansion, and like how that has played out in like recent ones. So like this expansion, the patch timings we've gotten have been very similar to BFA. So if you see Shadowlands as this like weird aberration of patch durations, which is like, you could say it's because of COVID or whatever reason, like obviously that is like the odd man out expansion. If you go back and like look at BFA, this expansion pretty much has followed that cadence, except they've done a lot more in the 0.5s and the 0.7s of doing just like much more content. So I'm interested to hear how that has played out for you all. And then what we just learned is they said this is the last raid. Very interestingly, this has followed BFA's timeline, but BFA just had a 4th raid and 4th major content patch, and this expansion just isn't. I think they said they're going to do like a faded, which we're going to do a faded on a whole other podcast. We can get into the good and bad of that. But like they've seemed like to just kind of knock that down. I wonder if that's a sign for the future that like the next couple expansions are going to only be 18 months, so they're all going to just be 3 raids. But obviously you're going to be
3
getting
raids
that.
in a faded raid.
Yeah, 3 raids, and then yeah, because Faded, and this is very short, I don't want to get into this big time. I think Faded is fine as a couple month excursion to shorten, to like break up that super long last patch and like spice it up. That's fine. It, in my opinion, it's pathetic if that's used as like a full replacement of a
Content
patch.
plan.
Yeah, that's if it's a full replacement of a patch, I think it's just simply not good enough. Maybe they innovate it, but if it's just like a small thing at the end, it's fine. But that's separate. I just want to hear about that. What have you guys thought about the 0.5, 0.7 patches? How do you guys feel about the no last raid this expansion? And then again, how would you guys build your expansion in the War Within for what the plan is? Do you like the kind of BFA style? Do you like the Dragonflight style? What would you want to see with patches?
For me, like I didn't really play, like I played a lot of Dragonflight at the beginning and then I kind of like stepped out. So I'm not really sure exactly how the content cadence has been. So I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's really going to depend on, with the new expansion, it's going to depend on how these delves go, right? Because like I think that one big weakness that WoW has is that there isn't a lot of like, and this is like always this like weird like kind of counterintuitive thing with like MMOs where people like want to play an MMO that's massively multiplayer online game, but they don't always want to play with other people. That's why you have the success of something like the Mage Tower or, transmog farming, or even like in an abstract way, like hardcore WoW, is that you're mainly playing by yourself. And I think that with a lot of people, if delves can be that replacement, if delves can be the Mythic Plus for solo players, I think that's going to be huge. And I think it really just depends on what's going to happen with that. And then that will inform kind of what I would want to see in a new expansion, because I'm not really sure about, especially like with Dragonflight, I don't know.
For me, it was definitely a little bit rough hearing the announcement where I'm like there and they're talking about like, yeah, we're going to do faster content and blast you guys with content. It's going to be great. And then also Mirror Dracil is the last raid of this expansion, and also fall 2024 for War Within. And it's like, hang on a sec. We talked a lot about all this faster content stuff, but now we've got a year, right, between this raid that's coming out next week and the next like raid, which for me is the primary content. I do recognize that the 0.5s and the 0.7s represent content patches as well, but I don't think there's been much compelling in the last few of them. I think Zeskara Vaults is the best of the like outside world content-y type stuff they've done for me personally, but like Dream Surges and Time Rifts haven't hit for me. I haven't been having fun doing those. And I do most of the outdoor world stuff. Like I like all those things. I spent a lot of time running around Argus and doing the rare stuff there. And like I didn't even have to. I was just kind of doing it because it was fun, right? And Broken Shore, those sorts of things. But none of the other, aside from Ziscara Vault, which I think was legitimately pretty good content, I think that the 0.5s and 0.7s have mostly not had much that kind of filled the void for me between raids. And so I am looking at we're looking at this really long year now coming ahead. I will be okay with it though if it is like, okay, we needed this time so we could start the process of then a faster cadence once we actually get into this saga, which I hope.
I think that's definitely.
I mean, that's
what it
definitely what
is.
they've implied,
Yeah.
right? But like, it's tough because I feel like we've had this storyline before, right? Where it's like, okay, Shadowlands, Shadowlands like cut content and it's like, okay, yeah, it's going to be a longer expansion with a bit less content so we can get into Dragonflight, and that's where things are going to be fixed. And now it's like, okay, well, Dragonflight's having that too, and that feels bad. I don't know.
Like you're
Yeah,
constantly
I
having to
agree.
pay it forward.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
at some point, and maybe that's going to pay off soon, but it definitely feels it was something where it's like, hang on, this kind of sucks.
That's a good point.
It was 100% noticeable in M+, by the way. Like, you know, how they did a bunch of work in the beginning of the expansion on M+, and then as we've gone on into the patches, there's been less and less work, probably because they're dedicating work towards the next expansion or the next patch or whatever. And yeah, for all these mini patches, I also feel the same way as you, Janos. Like, I get it. I'm a high-end player. This is not the content that I'm catered towards, but I still enjoy doing a lot of the open world content as well. And none of this has really hit. Like the whole like Dream Surge, Time Rift, whatever the hell they've been adding in these 0.5, 0.7 patches, they really have not hit for me at all. And I'm not sure if it's just me or everyone else. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Janos. For me, when I think of Legion, I think, or even like BFA, they had a lot of great content in between.
Yeah.
Like
Najatar.
Suramar,
Which ones did
I
hit
really
for you?
yeah, Najatar, Suramar, that was enjoyable. Wayward Army training, I enjoyed that. Mage
Yeah.
Tower, absolute banger. And there just doesn't really seem to be any of that. Like I'm kind of just continuing to do the same because I don't really feel compelled or interested in doing any of these types of content. Now again, like that could just be me. Like maybe there are dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of players who enjoy doing this type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, the delves too. Like going into delves now, like I'm also a little bit worried about delves becoming sort of like that. Now, I mean, obviously they want to make it an end game pillar and they want to make it interesting.
What worries you
But
about it?
well, I just really hope delves don't become like Warfronts, for example. You know, like some complete failure of an expansion's content. Like I would really hope that it's so maybe here's like a hot take, but I would really hope that delves are actually challenging and it's something that like inspires players to continue pushing forward and you know getting some good rewards out of it. Like I would hope that there are some rewards out of it too.
I
It
think
feels
that
kind of bad if it's something that's just like catch up mechanic or just like open world content that's for like you know maybe like a small specific group of players.
I am not a fan of the fact that a lot of the open world content is a participation metric.
Right, you're
I
literally just
think that
AFK
it's
in there, right?
yeah, it's like Warfronts weren't fun. Like I think that if you made a really really hard version of Warfronts, it would probably be kind of fun to do. But it's like I think if you compare this to like classic WoW, for example, I think classic WoW feels fulfilling and good to people because the game is, I mean, leveling it, right? I mean, not the raids so much, but leveling is fucking hard. Like if you pull 3 mobs, you can lose your whole character. So like because it's challenging and it's difficult, it feels fulfilling. And I think that, you know, like Withered Army training at the beginning, like the example you used, that was very challenging, especially to survive with having all of them towards the end, having all the strategies for that. Mage Tower was in itself very challenging. I mean, that was kind of the point. And
Yeah.
you know, Horrific Visions were kind of challenging at the beginning, and I think that made them fun. But if you compare that with something like you know, a lot of the outdoor content, it's just very like, okay, like, and this is something I was having a conversation with my chat about. It's like, okay, new zone comes out and there's a bunch of new rare spawns and there's like 45 people waiting at the rare spawn and they kill it and everything it does doesn't matter because it just dies. And so it's like this participation trophy content where all you have to do is just, you know, put your quarter in 15 times and then you win. There's not really a lot of challenge or depth to it. And it's something that I actually am not worried about that with delves, because I think that what they're going to use is they're going to make Braun or Bran Bronzebeard kind of like an augment to the different classes to make it to where you can build him to be like a tank, a healer, or a DPS, and that way you can kind of progress throughout the entire thing with him helping you. I think the reason why I'm kind of assuming that is that was one of the big weaknesses that Scenarios had in Mists of Pandaria, is they didn't have that option.
Yeah. So when you said, Dorky, you hope it's just not like Warfronts, I
Yeah.
kind of hear that it's just like, I hope they make good content. You know, because sometimes
Yeah.
content's good
Well,
and sometimes
so-
it's bad, you know?
I mean,
Warfronts were so disappointing.
Yeah.
Right. Because I feel like there's always this whole like, oh, you know, you're a hardcore player, like you don't know what casuals like. Casuals, it's like I don't think casuals also want some like AFK activity that you just go into and just like Asmon said, it's a participation thing. I think players want to be challenged too, regardless of how casual or time restrained they might be. I mean, like Classic's the perfect example, right? Like Classic is an actual challenge, as much as people might disagree. Like I'm pretty sure if I tried hardcore Classic, I probably wouldn't make it to level 60 just because I'm not as knowledgeable or as experienced as some of these players. And there's like a threat to like almost everywhere you go, whether it's pulling multiple packs or specific quests that might be hard. And that's how that's sort of the perspective that I got after playing Elden Ring as well, or like all these Souls-like games. There are so many casuals, and I bet so many bad players that play these games, but they're able to get through the challenge, and it's probably extremely rewarding for
And it
these
means
players.
something to them. Very
Yeah,
similar.
exactly.
Mage Tower is the best example of that that's ever been in WoW.
Right.
Where people are like, oh, I don't really want to, you know, oh, I'm not really doing all the hard content stuff. But when it's solo content and you can actually like strive to get better at it, and then you get like some really sick reward that's not necessarily tied to player power and it's like purely aspirational. It's made me wonder why they haven't just done that more. You know, like you know, I think Delves, when you're talking about going into a new patch, it is largely solo content. You're worrying about it being too easy. I think it is going to be difficult, and it needs to be, because you can level up Bran. I actually think Bran and whatever the guy is in season 2 or 3 or whatever, very similar to Withered training. You know, you have, they said they're going to like be able to improve Bran. I'm sure on a weekly pace you can make him stronger, and the only way that making him stronger is going to feel good at all is if it starts out very difficult and then you make him more OP. And maybe that doesn't last a full 6-month season, but even if they just had the 3 to 4 weeks I had fun in Withered training at the beginning of every single season, I would look forward to and log in for that. And I feel like they should do that. And I also just Mage Tower things, Brawlers Guild things. I think stuff like that has always been awesome, and I wish they just did more of that.
Well, look at another game that's like really successful. It's old school RuneScape. And I think that old school RuneScape, a lot of the things that they've added are these solo aspirational challenges, like the Inferno or like Iron Man in itself. So I think that people really like having solo aspirational challenges that they can work towards, because a big reason why I think people might not do Mythic Plus or might not raid or whatever is that it's, again, like this weird paradox with MMO players where people like playing in a shared world and being able to show off their accomplishments, but they don't like necessarily having their fate tied to the, you know, other players that are around them. So I think that giving people more things like the Mage Tower or like, you know, like the Inferno Cape and OSRS, or, you know, other games have just different random things, like a Green Fire for Warlocks. This was well liked by almost everybody whenever it came out. And just having more things like that, I think will only serve to make the game better. And as long as those things are evergreen, green in like the way that they did for the Mage Tower, I think it's just more content for players to look forward to.
Yeah, I think the thing they should be targeting with this is that feeling of early horrific visions progression, right? Where it's like, you know, that there's a week where it's really hard, like nuclear difficulty. And then next week it's like, it's pretty hard. And then next week it's like, okay, you've got the stuff you need to take this down now, right? Like if you have a good clean run, you got this for sure, right? And then the week after that, it's like, okay, here you go, right? Like it's not trivial, but you have now like twice as much corruption resistance as you used to have, right? It's like you have plenty of time, you know, play safe, big IO, right? And like I feel like Delves can go for the same sort of thing here, where it's at the start of the season, it's like, yeah, you're showing up there and your greens and your Bran is level 1 and he's trying to figure out what to do, and you're getting in there and you're getting halfway through or something and getting some stuff and it feels good and fun, but you know there's more to it. And then eventually you're getting to the point where it's like, okay, I have enough to get through this. And then everybody gets there at the end at some point, right? Like wherever your skill level is, at some point, Bran gets the super giga cannon and he can take out the whole place for you if you need him to.
Well, like, look at Mage Tower, right? Doing Mage Tower with Nighthold gear was a lot different than doing Mage Tower with Antorus gear.
Yeah, but some people need that though. Just like in
Yeah,
Elden Ring,
exactly.
some people
Yeah.
need to summon or use magic to like one-shot bosses and shit. Like there is built-in ways in those games for people to, and that's like a step in the problem-solving process, right? Like if
Mhm.
you are unable to do something, or someone might be able to one-shot the boss, but someone else maybe needs help, and then you have to figure that out. And that's part of the fun in that game, right?
Right. Yeah.
It tells you
And
to
that,
get to the number 4, and you can do 2 plus 2, 3 plus 1, or 5 minus 1, or any other combination.
Yeah.
I think that is, yeah, the player agency that it creates makes it exciting.
that's actually what Lost Ark does a great job as well. If you're doing a really hard boss like Vaulton, for example, you're gonna eventually get enough gear to where you can like face tank a lot of mechanics and just kill the
Mhm.
boss generally quick, so that you don't struggle with having as many mechanics as someone who's doing it at proper item level. So
And
that's a
I'm
great
okay
point.
with that. I think that's a good thing, and
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I think everybody here. I know Max, you played Lost Ark. Dratnos, did you play Lost Ark at all?
I got like to level 30 or something. I didn't get to the end
Okay.
game.
Well, yeah, I mean, Vaulton, in my opinion, is one of the best fights. Like, it is the best isometric. Like, I know it's not an ARPG, but it kind of is. Like, it's the best ARPG isometric fight I've ever done, and it's so good. And I think that, like, after that, like, Smilegate, they got afraid of people just like being able to clear it too fast and beat it too fast. And I think at a certain point, you should let players take advantage of those things because it's okay to let people feel powerful. And it's like, you come back in after you graduate high school to pick up your transcript and you're wearing a hat, you've got your sunglasses on. You don't have to follow the fucking rules anymore. And that's the way it feels whenever you're at the end of the season and you've got all the gear and you just go in there and you stomp the boss. And I think that's totally okay to have, especially if it's. I think that the best thing about it, though, is whenever it's earned. Like you've earned the ability to do that, not just something as simple as an amount of time has elapsed that it just makes it very easy.
Well, I think the way that happens in games, I've actually thought about this a lot,
Yeah.
is when you're a developer, I think you don't want to it depends on what you use as a metric for this, but you don't want your game to become too easy. Like for example, if Classic WoW never made their raids harder, it would probably like not be fulfilling to a lot of people who play the game. But it's really hard for them to pick a metric to use. So in Lost Ark, I think what happened is like things like Vaulton came out and then they're like, "Oh, well, these people are getting a lot better, whatever." But they're using the metric of like the very 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 best players in the game. So then you start making your content harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and it's like the majority of the game is getting better, but not at this massive spike level. And they're kind of looking at that top group. I think this happened in WoW rating. I think it happened in Lost Ark, where I think at some point, eventually, you can't let your stuff be super, super easy, or else, like we've talked about this whole time, you kind of lose that hard thing initially, and then growing more powerful and getting past it. But I wonder where the bar should be for that, and how games should approach that in general.
I could not agree more. I was actually talking with my viewers about this because it's like the super serious players, like you use retail WoW or PvP for example, right? These super good players keep getting better and they keep wanting challenges that challenge them as these better players. But the problem is that those players keep getting better, whereas the new players, like a new player coming into WoW today, is probably not that much intrinsically or innately more skilled than a new player in 2014. I wouldn't say 2004 because of computer and latency differences, but basically you have like the casual player base who, by the nature of the fact that they're new to the game or very casual, they're not playing the game all the time and they're not getting better at the same rate that the hardcore players are, but the game is getting harder at the rate that the hardcore players are getting better. That's the problem. And I think that we brought it up earlier. And I think that the best game to address this is Elden Ring. And Elden Ring was so good about not making the game super hard. Because if you guys played all the other Souls games, I don't know if you guys did or not, but before I played Elden Ring, I played all of the other Souls games and I had played through a lot of them multiple times. And I went through Elden Ring. It really wasn't that hard. And a lot of people complained about the difficulty, but the truth is that those people were the hyper minority. And I think that what made Elden
But
Ring
the
such
loudest.
a genius success is because it wasn't tailored towards people that have beaten Sekiro 5 times. It was created towards an audience of players, and the content was just good on its own. And it wasn't meant to be hard. It was meant to be fulfilling and fun for like a large audience of people.
Yeah.
So Elden Ring for me actually was really hard, unironically. But a large part of that was because of of
That
the
was your first Souls game.
self-imposed. Well, not just that, but also like the
There it is.
self-imposed challenges. Like I tried to not use any summons. I tried to do things with like lower item level or just lower level, and I had all these self-imposed challenges to make the game harder for me. Now, obviously, I've seen clips and videos of like people just like straight up one-shotting bosses or doing
Yep.
some like ridiculous
No
build or
hit.
having all these like yeah. And that's like one of the things that I wanted to touch on, how in these games they give you ways to express your ability and your skills. And it doesn't really feel like World of Warcraft really has that. It's the developers versus the players, versus like the players trying to develop their own skills and come up with their own challenges. Because that's how I've sort of seen M plus. Because M plus in the past has usually been something like, all right, if your group is insanely good, well then you just pull really big, right? Like you just pull bigger, you just
Yeah.
expand on the pull size, you just do more and more. Like you impose that challenge on yourself. Whereas nowadays it's like you sort of have no choice. Like you do the same type of pulls that a high level player does. It's just like a plain old 5-pack of mobs, and every single mob in that 5-pack has 2 mechanics each. There's like 4 kicks going on. There's all these things going on, man. And it's like what the developers have imposed on you rather than you trying to come up with the challenge yourself and trying to do crazier pulls, trying to time the key faster.
Yeah, I mean, as the probably by far most casual person here, I totally agree with that. I find it to be very exhausting to do a lot of Mythic Plus nowadays because of just how many things are happening and how many things are going on at the same time. And it's like at the end of the day, like I wouldn't really say that it's not fun. I would just say it's very tiresome. And at the beginning, I'll think, oh, I'll do like 4 or 5 today. And then after I do like 1 or 2, I'm like, okay, I just want to take a break.
Yeah, that used to be my vibe with like half the affixes in the rotation, where it's like, oh man, it's
Yeah.
bolstering week, right? Get me out of here after 1 key. It's sanguine week, right? And what they did is they started nerfing most of those affixes so that they aren't that exhausting feeling anymore. But then they put those mechanics just into the dungeons where it's now like, okay, some of these mobs are just so brutal to deal with, right? And you have to hit like 7 interrupts on a pack, and it's that taxes your group's brainwaves to the point where that's challenging. It's difficult, but it it would be nice if that was a little bit less of the experience, right? If there were more packs that were a little bit more filler, and not like filler so much, but like if more of the dungeon was possible to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more forgiving to not have to
Right.
have just every single kick assigned and every single
I
stop
just liked in
assigned.
Legion doing big pulls and
Yeah.
blowing everything up and doing a
Yeah.
lot of damage.
And
Like
turns out
not
that's
that
what everyone
complicated.
wants to do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
It's
everyone
really
wants
that
to do. Plus,
simple, man. Yeah. I do want to bring one more thing up about Dells before we move on to the next thing, because it's kind of transferred from that. I do think that this is going to be widely liked, and I don't even think it's going to really interact with a lot of people, at least in this call. The best gear that drops from Delves, I think, is heroic gear. Is that right? It's something like that.
I think
That's
they
what
said
they
that's
said.
what they were looking at, but I don't think they were like, we're gonna see what we can do. We want the gear to be good, but we don't want you to feel like this is the best way to gear your character or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, it isn't going to be the primary focus of someone who does super, super high Mythic Plus or really early cutting edge rating or really anything like that. And because of that, I think the people in this game who need content made for them are getting it. And I think it is very clearly not made for the people who already have a lot of aspirational content constantly. So I that at least gives me hope that this will be tuned. And that doesn't mean it needs to be easy. We kind of just went over how if it's easy, it might just be dog shit.
It won't be
So
fun if it's super easy.
yeah, exactly. So, I have a lot of hope in them getting that right. And even as a high-end player, I still think, even if you weren't really looking for the gear from it, I would just straight up do a Withered Army training every week. You're a little bit more powerful thing. I would just do that for fun. So I'm really looking forward to it. And the one thing that I do think is interesting is that they've mentioned it as an end game pillar and they mentioned it as being evergreen. This is going to be in the game for a long time. That's kind of a difference in perspective from before. In fact, a lot of people don't actually know this. I didn't know this until yesterday. That Mythic Plus was not intended to be evergreen. That was supposed to be a Legion only
Oh yeah,
mechanic.
you're right.
Yeah, it was supposed to just
Yep.
like be in Legion and then just be gone. Which
Mhm.
I mean, thinking about that now is insane, right? Because like so many
Yeah.
people play the game just in Mythic Plus. But they mentioned this and they're like, okay, no, we're keeping this game. We're making this a pillar. They're bringing PvP out of the vault. I just definitely just more along the philosophy shifts to go along with what they decided a while ago.
All right,
Yeah, I mean, I'm
okay.
very excited about that. I think that Delve can be that new thing that people can get excited for and like play the game for. Now, is that going to happen? Well, it's hard to say, right? We haven't really played it or seen it at all. But I just hope they keep iterating on it and they keep making it better because like one thing like you're talking about like these evergreen features, one thing that Path of Exile does really well, and it was a concern that I had going into Diablo 4, is that Diablo 4, especially with like season 1, they ended up just replacing a lot of the things that were in season 1 and they didn't go like in Path of Exile whenever a league comes out and if the league is well received, which the majority of them generally are, a lesser function of that league is maintained and put into what's called the core game, and then the core game is taken forward into the next leagues. So you have something where like there's one where like you would go into like these different maps that would collapse, and people didn't necessarily like that as much. It was called synthesis, but they liked like one or two of the maps, and so we have a couple of those maps now, and some of the modifications that they would have on gear still exist in the game, or like metamorphosis where you can like create a monster from like the monsters that you kill in like a map, which is like the dungeons in that game. And I think that really, like, I think to myself how much different World of Warcraft would be as a game if every feature that was added since Legion still existed in the game in some form or another, right?
Ooh,
Yeah.
yo,
And it's
I've
like,
actually said this before.
exactly, right? Like imagine if all of those things still mattered. Now, and PoE also runs into the other side of this problem, and they've had to scale it back multiple times, is that there's
Right.
too much to do. There's too much going on with your character.
Yeah.
So it's like it's really about finding that balance. And I hope that like, maybe by the second expansion, the midnight expansion or whatever it is, nightfall expansion, like we'll start to see a little bit more of that stride happening where we have these features. Like I want to see delves in Eastern Kingdoms. I want to see delves in like Northrend or something like that. Like that'd be really cool to me.
Max, we talked about this before. Remember how I brought
Yeah.
up, like, oh, what if we just had essences and corruptions and blah blah blah, and all, like
Yeah, and you remember
nowadays?
what I said?
Yeah, yeah, it would be too
Yeah.
much. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
definitely
well,
think that's like the biggest issue of PoE, right? Like it just suffers from too much. Like it's a hit and miss because like for the players who love this shit, like obviously they're gonna love this shit. But for so many of the players, especially people coming into the game, it's like, oh man, like when I think of PoE, so I don't play PoE, but
I'm too
I've heard
stupid to
great
play
things
that game
about
as
it.
well,
I
yeah.
love
Yeah,
that game, man.
same.
It's so good. I
Yeah,
disappear
I
every
cannot
time
get
there's a
into that.
league. Yeah.
I mean, look, I would rather play Diablo 4 just because it's so much easier to get into. And like, if I had the time, I would love to play PoE. But like, man, I'm just a fucking WoW player, and I don't have time to like
I'm just too
figure
stupid.
out all
There's
these
no way I
systems.
could figure that
Well, yeah,
game
that
out.
too. Yeah, I'm also dumb as bricks. But
Yeah.
I played it for 10
that
years.
aside,
I don't really know anything about it.
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. It's like you ask somebody who plays the game for a living, like, how well do you understand PoE? They're like, not that much.
Yeah,
That's one
but
of these games.
Yeah.
But
I've actually said this about Torghast too. Like, I felt like it was a mistake for them to scrap Torghast.
Just
Like,
give
they
up.
really
Yeah,
should
it
have
was
just,
sad.
yeah, like they should have continued with it and made it good, and they just scrapped it completely. And I felt like that was a mistake.
I
I
agree.
feel like so Torghast big time. Like the thing making a roguelike that had to be completed every single week by the worst players in your game for vertical progression means that you couldn't make it hard. And a roguelike that doesn't have there can be interesting decisions in a roguelike, but if you don't feel insanely overpowered from getting a good string of things you can apply to your character because there's something hard to apply it to, it's just nothing content, and that's what it ended up being. And yeah, they could have definitely made something work with that. But I want to ask you guys a way bigger question about what you were talking about with like adding that. So PoE, I think it depends on what game you want to be and what currently you're trying to like, what kind of players you're trying to get to play your game. So PoE, as much as if PoE, once you get to mapping in PoE, that game hooks you and they have you forever. I know that from anyone that I've ever heard that's played that game. But getting into the game, because all of the corruptions and artifact weapons and Azerite and artifact power and all that stuff exists for the long time, it makes it harder for new players to get invested in the game. But if you play the game, you're like, the amount of depth is incredible. So I think about that with WoW. You mentioned, what if they had all this stuff since Legion and kept into the game? I could see people like us who play this game a decent amount being like, the depth in this game is awesome. This is really, really cool. I could also see it even being a bigger challenge for newer WoW players to get into the game and actually it's already hard to understand, so they'd have to understand all of that as well. So my question to you guys is, in what direction should WoW go with that, knowing both sides of it?
I would
Mm.
love to see more levels of customization and depth to like character design and the way you play your character, and less depth and customization towards like the amount of mechanics that are thrown at you at a time. Like I would like to see that balance shifted a little bit more so players had more agency to build a character the way that they wanted to build a character, while at the same time they weren't having to deal with like 7 different mechanics at the same time like we were talking about with Mythic Plus. And I think also, and maybe we can bring this up later on, a number of the new raid buffs and everything are like, aren't they like protected or hidden affixes so they're not able to be tracked by WeakAuras? So maybe that might be something Blizzard is already thinking towards.
Yeah, very
That's
possible.
actually a take that I haven't heard yet, but that's actually really true. I mean, isn't that part of like what makes something like Mob, for example, really fun for a lot of players? Because I mean, I actually completely agree. Like, it would be really nice if you could express your character more, and there was more skill expression to your character, but less so than counter. Because in Mob,
Too
classes were
much
kind
shit
of
going
wild,
on.
right?
Well, I mean,
Like,
Mists of Pandaria, this is what my fucking opinion on Mists is that Mists of Pandaria made Razor like a massive company because you needed that mouse with 6 buttons on it or 9 buttons on it to play the game. Like it was
Yeah,
insane how many keybinds you needed. And I think that you don't need necessarily that many, right? Like maybe Mists of Pandaria was a bit too much, but personally, I felt like in Wrath and in Legion too, I felt like the amount of buttons and the amount of things that I could do felt pretty good. And maybe at the end of BFA as well.
I mean,
I
Path of Exile
yeah.
is an example of a game that has tremendous character depth, and often you're pressing one button on your character for the gameplay, like, or two or
If
three,
that,
right? Yeah, like you've got like 700 mechanics on the back
your
end
auto
of
bomber.
how it's working, but yeah, you're just you're just literally
Yeah.
mouse moving around, and the screen's exploding around you or something.
Mhm.
And that there's another example of a game where the boss complexity is a lot lower than WoW. Even the uber pinnacle bosses are, you know, it's like, oh, there's 4 mechanics here, right? And like they're all gonna one shot you if you screw them up, and your character has different ways of handling them. But it's not like rocket surgery, right? To do all the 30 different Sarkareth mechanics that you got to figure out. So I do think though that would be a lot harder to work in an MMO for similar reasons. Where like when you look at the Elden Ring stuff, like we can all go and play Elden Ring and have fun because we're going to play our sword build and we're not going to use any magic, we're not going to use any summons, and the game's going to be hard, right? We can go play Path of Exile and be like, oh, I'm going to roll up a chieftain this league, right? And I'm going to go play, this skill because it looks fun. But the second you get into an MMO where it's like a multiplayer game, the fact that there's 7,000 builds isn't actually upside if 3 of them are OP, and you got a team that's relying on you, right? You've got content that you're trying to clear, and it's not fun to roll into content and it's like somebody's there with their 2 swords out, and you're like, dude, you could have Alzur's Comet or whatever and just one shot
Yeah.
this boss. What are you doing here?
Did you say
well,
rocket surgery?
Yeah, man, it's
yeah,
like rocket science and heart surgery, but
At the
rocket
same
surgery.
time
substantially,
and twice
yeah,
as hard and way more
Holy.
complicated.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I think the point was more along like having more individual character expression or skill expression rather than like the challenge coming from the encounter, right? I felt that was kind of the point that I
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, the player's skill
Yeah,
expression was higher, and it was higher in a
right.
way that was like more directly fulfilling. It's like whenever you watch somebody play classic WoW, there aren't really there actually are a lot of buttons, but like each button really matters whenever they press them, right? There's not as much of a in retail WoW, there's just a lot of buttons and there's just like things happening all the time. But I do think that there's like a more slower and deliberate gameplay that can feel more fulfilling.
Now actually said this about Wrath of Lich King. He said something along the lines of like in Wrath of Lich King, he feels really good when he hits specific buttons, but
Yeah.
on retail, he just doesn't get that. I don't really know what it is exactly. Like, I can't really understand that, but I've heard that from other players too.
I think it's just like the difference in rotation. Like there's just less things going on back then. So one singular button can be a larger source of your power. So when you press it, you're just like, holy fuck, I just hit this thing with like a truck, you know? And then as the
Yeah.
game again, like we talked about this earlier, like kept needing to challenge players, they made rotations, they have more procs and they have like a little bit more intricacies to them where there's just more things involved that are you're using with your character that are not just, oh, when I finally get around to pressing this, I'm just beating the fucking shit out of this mob. And that is something that may feel like that. But then there are people who play Wrath and they're like, I can't go back to, like, I do a retail rotation, like playing Wrath is just like less interesting, right?
Hmm.
I think that there's always going to be people on like every part of the spectrum. And I think the reason why PoE is so well liked is because it doesn't try to attract people on the entire spectrum. PoE is a game for
A
enthusiasts.
very
PoE,
specific niche,
yes.
yeah.
And I think that World of Warcraft, like maybe this is going to be a hot take, but I think they really did themselves a disservice in like, I think you can see it here now in Wrath, where like Wrath of the Lich King is so dramatically different than, let's say, vanilla WoW, and also like a retail WoW, is that it tried to attract an audience of people who fundamentally don't like what their game is about. And PoE never really did do that. Now, I think that they should make some things easier in PoE, maybe improve some, readability of things like less and more multiplicative versus additive scaling. Sure, yeah, they should do that. But for the most part, I think the reason why PoE is so well liked is because it's a game that knows what it is, it knows what its target audience is,
Mm.
and it also knows what it's not. And I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really maybe what WoW should do more of. I don't know.
I wonder if WoW ever feels trapped by that. PoE was initially
Appealing to
made for this.
everybody?
Yeah, exactly. Like initially made this game that appealed to a specific audience, and then they just doubled down on that to make those people happy forever. They probably have
Mhm.
like, I know the game gets mad when they get like bad leagues and stuff, but they have just such a universally high approval rating of the actual developers than like most other companies, because they know that they're making that game for them, right? They might not be like the largest amount of people, but those people are all unbelievably invested. And I think WoW, for the longest time, I think back in Classic through Wrath, I think you had people kind of playing for unified reasons. You had people who were logging into level initially, and then it got into like raids. But if you raided, you also PvP'd, because that's a thing you do in the game. And then you do all of this and you play the whole expansion. And then as time has gone on, I don't even think this is a WoW thing, but I think it's a gaming thing. Gaming just got so much more specialized. WoW, when Wrath was out, it was the best game in the world by far. And then as time went on, you had you had games where like, oh, you like this specific part of a game? Okay, we have a whole new genre that's just for that. And that's happened over the past like 15 years. And I wonder now Blizzard is sitting here like, we don't have this group of people that all kind of want to play WoW. Maybe you have people who want to raid and you want a Mythic Plus, you want a PvP and you want a pet battle and you want to learn the lore. And then I don't know how many pet battles there are, by the way. I don't know why I threw that in there so up high, but like there's like people who
There's
log
dozens.
in and they care about the lore and like the casual content, and they have all this, and I really wonder if Blizzard feels like they can't make the game fucking awesome for any of those people without alienating anyone else, so they're kind of forced to make a game that is pretty good for everybody, or at times okay or not good, right? And I wonder if when they're developing this game, if they ever have thoughts onto like running into that issue with development.
I
It
feel like they
absolutely feels
probably
that
do.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I know there are like so many players who literally don't give a shit about M plus and they'd rather have it just gone or like completely reworked. But there's like a large player base that really loves M plus and they play it for M plus. And it's the same for like all these other sections too.
Hmm.
I feel like the game retail is so divided. I've mentioned this the other day where it feels like in retail WoW, there is a massive casual player base that just like literally never goes on Twitch, never goes on Reddit. They're
You never
just
see their
working.
opinions. They just
Yeah,
play.
exactly. They're just some 9 to 5 gamer dad who just comes home and they just do shit on World of Warcraft. And they're just a completely different player base from, say, the M plusers or the PvPers or the raiders. In fact, I don't even interact with a lot of the PvPers. And whereas like classic WoW, for example, sort of has a more meshed together community where everyone's kind of like working towards a common goal and people are generally playing the same game. Whereas like me, like bro, I don't even know what the hell a Dream Rift is, and I'm sure a lot of people are out there doing that right now.
Yeah,
I
do
think
think
it's a one size fits none type situation that they run themselves into.
it does remind me, like back in Classic, you would just do battlegrounds as you were leveling, right? Because like that's
Yeah.
what you do, right? Like you do everything, right? You do dungeons, you do PvP, you do raids, because that's all part of the path. Whereas now it does all fork and split. And if Delves is going to be that new endgame pillar that didn't exist before for those casuals, right? I think that is really exciting because that means it's not targeted at me, and it already does sound pretty cool for me. Like I'd love to get some more great vault rows on my alts, even on characters, whatever random alts doing 1 key a week, and then get some more vault rows so I can get my sockets out of the vault. Like that sounds fun, right? Like there's a lot of times I log into the game, I don't have stuff to do. Delves sound like a really fun thing to do. So if it's not aimed at me and it seems really exciting to me, hopefully that is not because it's missing those other people, but it's like it's really hitting them, and then I'm getting some collateral off of it. That's really good, right? Like that's obviously, like we know so little about delves, they could suck, right? Torghast, I was excited about from hearing about it, and it kind of sucked at
I was
first.
so hyped about
Yeah.
Warfronts.
Yeah, exactly right.
Oh
So
no.
we got to be a little bit careful
Oh,
here
no.
because
Yeah, I
like
get it.
we don't actually know if it's fun, but
I
if it
hope
hits the
is.
potential here, I think that's this. It
Yeah.
makes sense that it's going to be evergreen, right? Like this and a new endgame pillar, and that is like such a huge chunk of the player base that just has been without an endgame pillar for so long. It kind of had M plus, like low keys or whatever, as a thing for them, but I think this is a much better place for those sorts of players to lie. And I think the thing that really is the giveaway that is targeted at them is that it's solo or up to 4 friends, right? Like that flexible, role agnostic, any sized group thing is exactly where I think you hit those players the best.
Actually, I was just thinking about Warfronts and also how much islands have been slandered, but I actually think that is a example of like another. I don't think islands were bad. I think the fact that they were the best AP efficiency by I think like 3 times the next thing by spamming them forced you to do content. It's like, oh, you might really want to eat steak, and steak sounds really good. But if like someone was just forcing you to eat steak 24 hours a day, you'd probably be like, this is a little old. I don't
It's
really
too
want
much,
anymore.
yeah.
I don't want anymore. That's islands, right? So like I think they totally failed with the there was like one weird island. Was it the PvP islands where it was like super strange? I forget which one it was, but I think islands in general were fine, but people will just immediately get so mad about it because you just had to. It was just a bad decision with Azerite power.
True.
It's
actually
it's
true.
the same thing that we were talking about with Torghast, where like people have a bad impression of islands and they have a bad impression of Torghast because they had to do islands and they had to do Torghast. It's the same
True.
reason why a lot of people were like negative towards like Mythic Plus or like, kind of a lot of the Legion systems, is because the way that you had to progress in them was just really unfun and it was mandatory. Whereas the content that's like very much optional, things like the Mage Tower, they're not received that badly, even though they can be even harder in a lot of cases. So I think it's like more, if you make people do something, you're going to make them hate it.
Yeah, I've said it before about Mage Tower. If they made Mage Tower some weekly chore, people would have hated Mage Tower. But
Absolutely.
the fact that it was just like some aspirational challenge for you to get some cool transmog, I think that alone made Mage Tower a massive success.
And think about challenge modes in Mists of Pandaria. You didn't really
Right.
need to do those for anything. But if you got the gear, then that was really cool. And I think that's what made them so well liked.
Okay, I have an interesting question. I actually wanted to ask this to someone who does classic, because one thing I think is a fascinating difference between retail and classic is that in classic you can do relatively, it's a bit harder in ICC, but relatively very easy content to get the absolute best gear in the game. And in retail, that is not even remotely true. It's, over 10
Yeah.
and 15 years of time, it's just become like they need to challenge you in some way. And we can have a whole other podcast about the direction of rating and things like that. But I've always found that to be really interesting. And recently they have been doing things to make raids more accessible. Like they did, I think it's like Cross Realm Mythic from day one, should have been done for years. They also need
Yeah.
to remove the Mythic lockout. But I wonder, how do you feel about potentially in retail? This is kind of a big can of worms, but the idea of making kind of rating like that, where
Mythic cosmetic kind of and heroic be
well,
the cap.
yeah, I guess maybe the closest thing, I guess, that other games do this. Ultimate is a very different, and rating in Final Fantasy is so different from WoW in so many
Kind of
ways.
like
But
hell
like,
mode, maybe?
yeah,
In Lost Ark?
yeah, kinda, yeah, where it's not like
Yeah.
you're doing this to get this item you need to be the best geared that season, but you're doing it because it's awesome. And that way you can make it for like a specific group of people. I don't know if that needs to happen. Like WoW's done this forever. I doubt they would ever do it, but I'm just interested in your take on a big reason why people raid in one game than another, right? Because I don't know if you were to make retail raids like let's just say this for the sake of argument. let's say retail raids are to get the best gear in the game, just like classic, you log on and you like clear this unbelievably easy raid, like normal raid in WoW
Sure.
retail
Yeah.
right now. And then you get the best gear in the game over time. Are more people playing the game if that is what the game is, or should the harder content? I mean, obviously in MMO, it's a big reward philosophy, right? Like you want harder things to reward you with better gear. Like that makes the challenge worth it. But then at the same time, sometimes making really cool challenges, people appreciate it when there's nothing attached to it at all. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna be honest. I think that a big reason why people started getting really into like hardcore classic, I don't think it was a coincidence that it was the same time that Ulduar came out. You know, Ulduar was a massive step up in difficulty in classic WoW, and I think it absolutely is true that a lot of the people that are excited about playing like, you know, classic WoW, they're excited about it because it rewards you just for being basically there, for participating in the raid and just for getting the gear by itself. And I think that the easy nature of it, and also it's not that it's easy, it's that the difficulty usually occurs outside of the raid. It's like the logistical challenges, it's the getting a group together challenges, getting everybody to the raid instance challenges. All of those things are what makes classic WoW raiding difficult. And I think that for MMO players, that's probably more fulfilling in general. And I think that, like, personally for retail WoW raids, like, I played the game for a long time. So, like, if I wanted to Mythic Raid again, like, I'd have to practice. Like, I would, but I could probably figure it out, sure. But for a lot of these people, like, you know, like, they're not super great at the game, right? That's just the truth. And if you have, like, 6 mechanics that they have to pay attention to, it's just not really gonna happen. And I think that with Classic WoW, the reason why it's so popular straight up is because the raids are super fucking easy and they give you the best gear in the game. And it is rewarding for people. They log on and they look forward to that. Now, is that something retail WoW should do? I do think they could tone down, like, and this is like, again, very much in line with like the add-on conversation, because I think WoW raids are harder because of add-ons in general, and it's kind of like an arms race, you know? But if you didn't have that, I do think that it would probably be healthier for the game as a whole if the mechanics were, maybe there were less of them, but the ones that existed were a little bit easier to do, and you had less like pass-fail group mechanics that are based off of like one player's actions.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, that's what makes some of the great raids really, or great raid fights really great. Like Rash Shock, pretty simple boss. It's like the mechanics aren't that hard, but because it's like a big number check, it's actually fun. And same with like Sludge Fist, super simple fight. You just run the boss into the pillar and
But
soak the
every single
swirlies.
mechanic in Sludge Fist is so well done,
Right. And
right?
it's
After
it's
they
about the
did like the
numbers.
graphic changes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
usually about like, oh, like how hard is it to heal, or like the DPS check, pumping big numbers.
The player is playing against themselves and not a series of obstacle courses the developer put in front of them, right? It's like, how can I maximize my damage in these uptimes? So it's more like the player feels himself getting better as like as a whole, as a player, rather than just memorizing different boss timings or boss mechanics.
I do love these patchwork style fights, but I do also think there is something to the really nasty coordination end bosses, right? Where it's like Jailer or Denathrius or something like that, where you do actually have like a really difficult recipe and 20 chefs that have to do the right things to make that happen. That it's so rewarding when you actually do get that coordination and do all the right stuff as a team. But yeah, I think the patchwork things are also really fun. The Sludge Fist, when it's done well, really good fights. I do think that more accessibility into retail rating is good, but also we don't need to target like people that love classic and love classic rating.
Yeah,
We
they
don't
do
need to
exist
target them
really
for
well
retail, right?
alongside
Like,
each other.
yeah,
I
you
think
don't need
that's a
these two
good
games to be
thing.
the same, right?
Yeah.
Like they should be different and both be good.
Kind of like what we were
and-
just talking about.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like it's
Mhm.
it's about having two great games, and I do think that there's stuff that retail and classic can learn from each other, and Yoink, especially the Season of Discovery, the set of changes and the Cataclysm set of changes that they're looking at. There are certainly some ways to improve both, and I agree with you about the add-ons and like how much the difficulty should be locked behind setting up a perfect UI and having good reminders and having like good raid leader outside the raid type stuff. Like those when those are the right answers to retail's problems, I think that's a less fulfilling challenge to solve. But I also love the high coordination retail fights. Now that might make me a pretty small minority, right? Like mythic raid, high end stuff. But I would personally be pretty sad to see those go.
I
Yeah,
don't think that they should go. It's just like maybe they shouldn't be like the main content. Sorry, Max. Go ahead.
Yeah, add-ons are weird. So add-ons most of the time, like WeakAuras and probably 90% of raid fights are just way more customizable debuffs with sounds and size and most things like that. I would say like it's become more of a buzzword. Like you see, like this raid had a terrible fight like this, Echo of Neltharion. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's like you basically progress this fight and you are progressing a weak aura more than you are. It's actually maybe the first fight that's ever been this way. There's been fight defining weak auras, but none of them were progressing a weak. This fight, you're actually progressing people looking at a map and going to the right spot. It's fucking horrible. But the issue with that is not add-ons. The issue with that is a major flaw in boss design. I've done this before, but I can show a VOD from our Mythic Neltharion testing in which none of these problems existed. You didn't need a weak aura at all because you could just break multiple walls and spread these things all the way around the room. And they just made terrible changes to prevent you from doing that and forced you into this super ridiculous positioning strategy. And I feel like that's pretty much been the case with any mechanics like that. Now, do I think that developers at times are like, oh, we need to make something harder because like this wasn't hard enough last time? I think that does happen. I think that happened majorly in Sepulchre, actually. That's, I think, when they did this the most, where they were just fully on this. But I think, and I know they know this, I've talked about them with this over the weekend, multiple encounter designers. You can make a fight that is perfectly hard for all the right reasons and very challenging and strategically challenging, and basically have no weak auras involved with it whatsoever, other than it just being your UI that making it look the way you want and the debuffs looking the way you want. Like Rashok is a perfect example. Rashok could have been the second to last boss, made a little harder with things that were purely visual and in the fight, and it would have been incredible. I mean, it was incredible where it was, but most of the time the add-ons have been like, oh man, you need this to play the game kind of thing. Or you mentioned 21st Man. Pretty much every raiding game, if they had a extra person outside that really knew what they were talking about and had all their POVs, it would make them go way faster. I don't know if there's a way for Blizzard to mitigate that.
Stuff like the Reminder Weak Aura, though, those things are super OP. Not a lot of people use them, but like when you start using them and it's just like, oh yeah, 630, press Spirit Link Totem or whatever, like, and you just get to offload your brain cells onto that.
Yeah, but then
exactly.
So that stuff is bad, but I also think that's the kind of stuff that were like way back in the day. You'd have like a post-it note on your fucking monitor or something, and you'd have like some way of like reminding yourself of that.
Yeah,
I think
maybe
there's some way of doing.
it.
I think there's some way of doing that. I think another talking point I kind of hear is like, I wish they would just, why not just remove all add-ons and bake all this into the game? It's lazy. Well, I mean, there's an opportunity cost to that too. Like they, let's just say they want to fully get rid of add-ons, but then they want to have some better. You would need a lot of things, but like way better debuff customization and stuff like that in the game. It takes years to do that, and maybe they do that, and it's not better than weak auras are now. So why would they like do that, right? And you're like, unless you're saying like, oh, just hire more people and get it done. It's like, okay, well, if the answer is you wish Blizzard would just spend more money and hire more people, then I'm on board. That sounds great. Do that all the time, infinitely. Make a huge, get a bunch of people. But that it's going to come at the cost of other things. Unless they were to actually hire like Mr. Weak Aura, if that's a person, and just like, hey, can you like make something in game that's like easier to understand and like maybe a little bit reduced, but like has some. Because I don't think I doubt, is anyone against like weak add-ons that you can just simply make your UI make the way you want it to look?
Love
is
those.
that bad?
My only real problem is how it always breaks every goddamn patch, and it's so frustrating. Like it literally broke this patch too, and having to keep it up. That's the real pain I have. But yeah, that's aside the point.
I think that the add-ons that are problematic are combat add-ons that increase your awareness.
So
Like,
DBM.
Because like even things that call out timers or give you indicators to know something, if you think about a person's attention like a pie chart, like basically DBM can take a slice out of that pie chart so you can focus more on other things. And that does make it easier for you to focus on a fight, and it does increase the level of like awareness that you have. And those are really the problematic add-ons, are the ones that effectively, like, did you guys watch the kill for the world first? And this is actually for Heroic Lich King.
Yeah. Oh, Paragon.
So y'all saw the whenever the Valkyrs spawned, it actually showed not only is there a hammer of justice on each one, but the hammer of justice is indicated, and the paladin that's supposed to do it has their name next to the character model. Like, that is an insane level of min-maxing, and that just simply makes the fight a lot fucking easier. And I do think that that is problematic, because
Yeah,
like, how do
definitely.
you fight against that? And I'm actually kind of curious, because like, I don't understand this as well as you guys do. What is really the way that Blizzard can like counteract that? Because I'm hearing about protected auras and protected buffs.
Hmm.
Is Blizzard able to just make it to where you can't track that stuff?
So they're trying to. They did a
Yeah.
little bit this raid. They did it
Yeah.
on 2 bosses,
The
and
bad
on
news
one of
is,
them,
yeah, one of them was that
yeah,
the horrible boss we talked about where
yeah,
you're progging a weak aura. Those were protected auras, but you would just get like a macro that you would press that would
I
tell
see.
all
let
the
the
other
w
people with the weak
yeah,
aura that you
so
had the
basically
mechanic.
what
Yeah.
what private auras do is it prevents the like add-on API
API, right?
to be
Yeah.
able to even see that you have this specific debuff. So the way
Mhm.
around it is you press a macro that tells the weak aura that would assign it that you have that debuff. So it's just like annoying and not really much of a change. Now there's 2 bosses in this raid that have private auras. That boss, which was horrible, and then another boss, Forgotten Experiments, which was, in my opinion, a perfect iteration of what private auras should be. So this mechanic picked 3. The boss had a charge that would put a bleed on you, and if it charged through anyone else, it would give them a bleed. Then it would mark 3 people. You would see it over your head, but that was a private aura. If there wasn't a private aura, a weak aura would tell you to stand on the triangle marker for one person, star for someone else, and diamond for someone else. And you wouldn't even interact with the mechanic. You would just see go to diamond, and you would do that. Right? That's bad. But they made it a private aura, and it wasn't important enough to press a macro, so players just YOLO spread out and played the mechanic like you would naturally. In my opinion, that is exactly what raid mechanics should be like. You know, you're saving the player from themselves with private auras. In my opinion, 95% of the private auras they put in this upcoming raid are exactly like that. So they're
good.
going down the road of, and by the way, we can talk about this later. This raid fucking owns, but the one of the best ones they've made in a long time, just like boss for boss. But they're doing that private aura thing like a ton in this raid, and I think the goal is, and they're gonna have to try and be creative with addressing it, but I think their goal is to make raiding not like that. Because I would agree with you. I think a lot of people, I'm defensive of add-ons because people say delete all add-ons from WoW, and I'm immediately like, there's no fucking way that deleting like UI add-ons
I
and
like my
like
bag on.
yeah, like simple
Yeah.
quality of life add-ons, that's fucking crazy. Like these are just make the game better, right? But I do, and I think everyone would agree that anytime you're getting a super intrusive raid combat weak aura, or even, I mean, I'm a fucking raid leader, right? Like my job becomes more important, and what I'm doing is more relevant if I don't have any of this other shit, and I just have to figure it out and do it. There's been a few fights like that, and I've really enjoyed it, right? So I think most people are fond of that if they were to do it right, but it's kind of hard to see how they would get to that point.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope that they're able to like get past that, because I do feel like weak auras and like all the add-ons that players feel like they kind of have to have, especially like awareness add-ons. Like everybody has, I see add-ons for Mythic Plus, and like Dorki, you can probably attest to this more than I can. That will tell you like, okay, this person's interrupt is up now, and like just like the level of awareness and just like the increased ability that gives you is just massive. It's huge.
Yeah.
It really is. I've mentioned this before, where I tried plugging a 28 key on my bear
Yeah,
tank
with
with
no
0
add-ons, yeah.
add-ons. And on one hand, it was extremely liberating. It felt like, I was just completely free of all these like dings and dongs and
Mhm.
freaking all this like crap on my screen. But at the same time, I felt blind as a bat, man. Like I could not tell what the hell was going on. I couldn't tell if my team had kicks up. I didn't have like, sound warnings for like specific frontals. I couldn't even tell like how long my incarn was lasting for unless I look at the top right of my screen.
So
Yeah.
And yeah,
there's 2 parts of that though. This is relevant to what you're just saying. So while yes, but the thing is you've used those add-ons to allow you to become a better player and focus on the things that you can by
right.
using those as a crutch to focus on things. So when you take them all away at once, it's obviously going to be a shock because you're literally training yourself to ignore all the things
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
were
yeah.
tracking. So like if you played like that all the time, you would obviously develop the skill set to see everything else that was happening, and you would feel it better, or you would know it better, or you would be better at you would have to communicate more with your kicks and stuff. So I think it's way too extreme when you do it right away. But I mean, yeah, I mean all of us would, and definitely an interesting experiment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say like for the most part, I would just play worse, right? And I'm pretty sure every single top level player in the world would probably say the same. Like, yeah, for sure, you could still continue to do what you do. You would just have to do a little bit simpler. Like
Mhm.
instead of doing like this massive pull, you'd have to cut down like maybe 2, 3, 4 mobs so that you have a little bit less going on. And I've actually had this discussion with Evade not too long ago, but it was like a pretty good discussion about like how add-ons and WeakAuras affect how we play nowadays versus say BFA. Like back in BFA, he talked about how there was this example of how you had to like blade dance the bleed from the Berserkers in King's Rest. And there were no nameplate CD WeakAuras at the time. It was like
No, that's a
just
good
not a
point.
thing. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like he had to just like mentally, count it in his head and he had to like, be able to react. He's like, all right, this berserker's about to do bleed in 2, 1, and just like be ready to react to it. Whereas if you had add-ons, right? If you had weak you just know like, oh, okay, you can just continue doing your DPS rotation, continue calling kicks on these 5 mobs and AoE stops, and then he sees that like, oh, the blade dance is coming up in 2 seconds, and then you just get ready to press your blade dance in 2 seconds, rather than having to like fixate half of your brain into this part and the other half on trying to do the rotation and all, and just like fucking there's all this shit going on. Whereas if you had WeakAuras, it simplifies that by a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to fully get rid of it, but I think you can curb it. And I think curbing the most annoying versions of this is actually just not having faults in boss design. I really think boss design and bad, clearly too complicated mechanics are the cause of like over reliance on these things. And you could argue that they ended up getting to this point because WeakAuras ever existed in the first place, right? I mean, they've had to nerf WeakAuras multiple times because they were just so insane. But yeah, I don't know. The whole thing is kind of fucked, but I think as long as like I'm trying to like jailer bombs. Did you guys ever? I know you two did Mythic Jailer, but
It
like
That shit was
assigns the
bad.
player. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've
if
I've
you
seen it. I know what you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
okay. So if you did not, in my opinion, of all of the mechanics I can remember, including like the Archimond mechanic, which by the way, the world's second kill did without a weak aura at all. Paragon, shout out Paragon. I think that might have been the most impactful weak aura that's ever existed. I think he would have wiped in that phase like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more times if that one thing did not automatically assign. And those are the best guilds in the world. My opinion
Mhm.
is if the difference between weak aura and non-weak aura on a mechanic is that's fucking terrible. Like that is clearly bad. You could make the mechanic multiple different ways. You could give it out 3 at a time with a 2-second delay and make it infinitely easier, right? Like even just the same mechanic. So I think that's the thing, because the reality is most mechanics in World of Warcraft are, you know, the difference between you doing them with and without a weak aura is either nothing or extremely small. And they can be really hard too. It's just the way that it's visualized and the way that you deal with it. So yeah,
It's the awareness of it. Yeah. So
yeah,
what you're
exactly.
saying basically is like it's not really a problem with the weak auras. It's a problem with like the specific mechanics. And if the mechanics were designed in like a better way, it would be less of a problem.
100%. I think that
Okay.
weak auras, as the most problematic versions of weak auras, are only created as a solution to bad boss design. Yes.
I would also say it's largely the community and how people play the game now. Because like the reality is you don't actually need all these add-ons for majority of players. I would say like over 90% of the players. I mean, hell, Asmon, you tanked the 24 of every day with like no real major add-ons. And
I guess you guys are helping me.
well, yeah, but I mean, I'm pretty sure you could have
Yeah.
tanked that by yourself too. But the thing is, like, it's been perpetuated on the community so much so that if you're trying to pug a heroic raid, what happens? You join the raid leader links a weak aura package that you're supposed to download, and it's just like some freaking 20, 40, 50 downloading weak aura shit from Liquid or whatever. And this
Oh
happens all the
shit.
time. Like, hell, even in my guild raids, I have like, every single guild I've been in, all my guild leaders have been like, all right, guys, make sure you download the weak auras and, make sure you have this or that add on. And you really don't need all this stuff, but
Well,
it's
so you're right, Dorky. but the reason why people do it is they want to like respect their own time, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually
yeah,
true in the
yeah.
race world
It's
first
easier.
too.
Yeah.
If you guys followed the race for a long time, you would know that like us and Echo used to go about this totally differently. Echo would like, if you could do a mechanic on your own at 97% consistency, they would go to 100 by using a WeakAura. They'd use a WeakAura, and we never would. We would just be like, that's lame. We actually really don't like using WeakAuras usually if we can help it. And then over time, it's like, oh, well, I mean, if you're doing this purely for the sake of competition, you have to do that. So over years and years and years, even if something can be done, you always try to make it automatic if you can, which again is lame, but you're going to do everything you can for the sake of competition. The issue is, in gaming in the last 4 to 5 years, especially, actually maybe even 3 years, it's become so tier listy, and what is the absolute pure competitive best thing to do? And a lot of people who are playing the game for fun don't
Yep.
realize that you don't have to really do all this shit. Like I think an analogy I gave of this before is like, let's say you're playing Diablo 4 or 3 or whatever, and like a Sork is going to play totally different than a Barb. Total different class fantasy, total different speed of gameplay, everything, right? And then you as a player, like I like to play shifty, fast characters like rogues, right? So I know that I'm going to play a rogue because I like that a lot more than playing a Barb, right? But then what a lot of players will do before they ever start playing the game is look at a tier list of what the best classes in the game are, and maybe the type of gameplay they identify with the least is S tier, and then they just play that and hate the game, right? And like that whole philosophy has just led to a lot of people kind of unintentionally ruining fun in their own games, and I think that's definitely true with WoW. If you're doing a heroic raid and someone is not going to pull the boss until you download a WeakAura pack, that's absolutely ridiculous. But people have just become used to doing it because they want to get in and out of there in 30 minutes and go like have dinner with their wife or something, right? So like I don't know, it's hard to deal with, and I think it's just so much just where gaming has gone more than a specific WoW issue.
I think also, like this is, you brought this up earlier, Max. It's like this is very common with Mythic Plus too. Is that Mythic Plus, the level of gatekeeping is extremely high. And I think that once you really break it down, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense because if it's same with like Lost Ark. Lost Ark has a massive problem with gatekeeping. And why is that? Well, I think it's pretty simple. The harder you punish players, the harder players try to not get punished. And because Mythic Plus failing in Mythic Plus, you lose the key, it gets downgraded, etc. And like you're totally fucked, and you lose like the Raider IO score, and that's like very important. Well, then people are going to try even harder in order to avoid having that happen. Whereas if there wasn't this type of like punishing fail state, I think that people would be more willing to take risks and try things that are a little bit off the beaten path. And if you look at Lost Ark, it's kind of the same thing. It's like Light of Salvation is like kind of this it's like a card set that you get in the game that takes like 6 months to get, and if you don't have it, a lot of people won't even play with you, and it gives you a relatively big damage increase, but not at the level that people require it at. And the reason why isn't necessarily because it gives you 8% more holy damage. It's because it means that you've played the game for a long time, and the chances of you making a mistake are a lot lower. So people become much more gatekeepy the more that they get punished for not gatekeeping. I think it's just that simple.
So how much of this do you think like happened in the past, though? Because I didn't really play a whole lot of Classic and Wrath back in the days, but nowadays it's definitely much more gatekeepy than before, right? Or am I wrong about this?
There's always been gatekeeping. Like I remember back in vanilla WoW, and like this is like what was this, like 17 years ago? Like I barely played vanilla WoW. I got 60, and I rated a tiny bit. But like you would get invited to a group, and you would go to the store, or not the steps of Stormwind, and you would get kicked out because the raid leader didn't understand what your class priority was for gear. And like that would absolutely happen. So like there's always been gatekeeping. But I do think that in a general sense, like the level of classic gatekeeping probably isn't as just like brutal as the level of gatekeeping in like retail WoW or for Mythic Plus, right? Like people will invite a rep paladin in classic WoW. Like I can't believe they do it, but they do it. And I see it all the time in groups. So obviously like there's going to be gatekeeping and people that are going to trend towards doing whatever is the most optimized. But I do think that there's also the more that you punish people for not optimizing, well, the more people will try to optimize so they don't get punished. I think it just makes sense.
I think it's a group size thing too. Like
It is.
Mythic Plus, like 39 specs, and you can only take 5. And then if you think about the decision that someone is making at any key level, let's just say John has his plus 16 under rot. He wants to do that in 40 minutes, get his loot, make it be as clean as possible. He either wants to push up his key or just get gear. He has no way to know who he's inviting other than what he perceives to be the best classes. He's way less likely to play with a different class before that point because everyone else does this. And he wants the best chance of making the next 40 minutes of his life, again, because keys deplete, worth something. And then he's going to, there's no way to tell if someone's a good player. You just see their score and their spec, and you just end up picking whatever you think the best is of that. In raid, I don't there's this weird thing where pugs think that like this 2-3-9 ratio like makes raids easier, and it's completely ridiculous. Like it makes no sense. Like the
Probably
raids
per boss basis, right?
I mean, it just doesn't matter. Like if you see someone good and geared that applies to your group, you just like add them and it's always good. But the there's way less like of that in rating and like heroic rating or like mythic pugs where like there's the selection bias, but in mythic plus specifically it was terminal last season for sure.
Well, that's the one that depletes keys, like because you don't deplete a key if you wipe in a group in like a raid, right? You just go back and do it again.
But
so I think that's kind of what happens, is that you make it harder to to have a failure or a point of failure, and then people just aren't going to want to have somebody that can make a mistake. And it's also like how much individual player mistakes can affect other players.
I think there's also a huge like feedback loop, right? Where it's like, if we can get the balance within a few percentage points, then people don't feel like a spec is very bad, and then good players will play it, right? But if the balance is like further off, then we get this herding where the good players are now flocking to the good specs, and so those specs are now overperforming because anybody who's still playing the bad specs, they could have swapped and they didn't, right? And like
it's
you
like
get
a
this
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly, right? And it becomes
I think
more
you're
and more true.
100% right.
Yeah, and so like this season, augmentation, fire, shadow, or whatever was clearly good, and then all the good players swapped to it, and then it was even better because now there's no high end balance druids left, right? They're all augmentation evokers now, and so the balancing being close for Mythic Plus for retail is, I think, a very important piece of the puzzle that explains how we did have some diversity. We had a lot of diversity in early season 2 and in Dragonflight season 1. Like those seasons were actually extremely diverse. You could play like 15, 20 different specs at more than 1% representation in the top level keys. Now there's like 4, 3, which is it's rough. And it's not that they're that much better, right? It's not like augmentation is 400 times better than Fury, right? It's like, that the players moved, right? The players herded over towards it. So
well, people hear that something is better and they just go with it because, like, it's what Max said, right? Like, you have no frame of reference to determine whether somebody is going to be good or not based off of an item level and, like a class. That's basically what you're looking at. So, like, you look at their score, their item level, and their class. And there are going to be classes that outperform others. So if you're going for the highest percentage probability of success, like it's like kind of goes back to like the 97% versus 100%. Well, 100% is higher. And if you don't want to have your time wasted, you're going to go with 100% every single time over 97. And I think that's just kind of what happens with players. And also, like, you get to the point to where, and this is like with Classic, is that you want to invite people that are doing meta things, because the chances are that the people that are doing the meta things are also going to be the kind of people that want to improve and be good at the game. Because it would logically make sense that people that don't really give a shit, this is kind of what you're saying, Dratnos, but like on the other side, is that the bad players that don't really give a shit don't care if they play bad specs because that's not their focus.
Yeah, and it actually presents a different problem too, which is that multi-classing in WoW is actually really hard. The amount of people that can play at a high level and play multiple classes or roles are extremely low. A lot of people feel forced to do that because getting invited to groups, right? Like if you really want to play Mythic Plus, that is your game mode, and you're playing a certain spec, some patches you can't play the game, at least at the key levels you want to play. So you feel forced to reroll. Well, a lot of people don't have the sauce like that, so they end up re-rolling, and they're like, you guys have all queued in with these people. They have a decent Mythic Plus score. They're playing the new patch. They're playing the new FOTM class of the patch, and they just fucking stink, right?
Yep.
That happens at all levels, but a lot of those players would do a lot better if they would just stick on their own class. So now you're just like you said, Dranos, you're worried about recruiting these other classes because you feel like they don't care. But in reality, the players would almost always perform better on their main class. So like they feel forced to do it, and it's going backwards, and it's
real bad. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
situation
I think it
where nobody
depends. I
wins.
mean, there are definitely times where, like, you know how like people say, like, oh, if you reroll augmentation, then you're just gonna have easy success.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's like always true, but that's definitely true a lot of times. I mean, it's like JB said. I remember that one tweet he made. He said something like, "I don't need a car to go to the grocery store either, but you'll never catch my ass walking." Like, yeah, I mean, I'm
Just how
gonna
it is.
try to do what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do whatever is gonna be the best. And I mean, so this actually didn't happen as much back in Legion, because one specific thing that Legion did really poorly at, which also turned out to be good in this situation, is they made it really hard for people to reroll. Like, if you wanted to play an alt,
It's true.
good luck with that. You'd have to like freaking grind up all that AP. You're gonna have to get all that Titan Forge gear. You're gonna have to give good legendaries. But what this did create was it allowed players to be valued for how good they were at their class, regardless of their spec or role. There were so many times where like you would play with someone that was really good and had a ton of gear and a ton of AP and just put a lot of time into their character because they were just good as hell. Like, there's been hunters that people have invited in Legion that just did so much damage because their character was just like built different. Like, maybe not necessarily them as a player. Well, I'm sure like them as a player was also extremely good, but their character was also really strong, and they couldn't just easily swap over to some meta or bottom character, which obviously like was not great. But that was one of the good sides of it being harder to reroll.
I kind of want to. Do you think we should talk about the release,
Yeah.
the reorder?
I think
Okay.
that's a good
Oh
thing
yeah.
to.
Oh
We can end the
Yeah,
show with a
that's a
little
big
bit of
topic.
a.
So WoW caught a lot of dubs this weekend, so they thought they would be real cheeky and sneak in a little L in there and people wouldn't notice, but they did something that's really it's become the meta for game releases. Like a lot of games have done this, like, oh, you can get our super giga edition and you can play our game a little early. And that has worked, and I haven't seen a lot of complaining on that for like single player games, especially like RPGs and stuff like that. But this is an for
All
me, it
start
feels
for it.
yeah, I guess, but I just feel like in an MMO, it's strange. I feel like
Oh,
it's just strange.
this is what I think. I think that it's completely stupid. It's unfair. It's another way that segments players based off of income. It's another grim reminder that we're not playing in a fantasy world, but this is a capitalist endeavor. I think it's just annoying. It doesn't really affect the game a whole lot. And I just think it makes the game feel a lot cheaper. And if I made a game, I'd fucking do it, because it only affects the first 3 days, and it's probably a massive amount of money. And I bet that's how Blizzard looks at it. Is that, like, as much as I don't think anybody in here likes it, but the truth is that the people that don't like it won't act on it. And I think that's just
Yeah,
the
they're
reality.
buying it anyway. Yeah,
They're
they're
gonna buy
buying it
it anyway.
anyway. And just to be
Yeah,
clear,
yeah.
everyone here is going to buy it, if not have Blizzard give it to us. So the like
Yeah.
we're saying this for like most people that would be opposed to this. And the other side of it is beta.
I like the
Beta
beta.
access, yeah.
So the beta thing got like some initial negative reactions, but I actually know, and I constantly see on stream, a lot of people that would love to play beta when it comes out, but they can't because it's like it's always been this weird lottery system / do you know people. And now at least if you know you're playing the game anyway, you can deterministically get it. So it seems a little gatekeepy, but I don't know. What do you guys think about the beta thing?
I think that's
I
just
don't
good.
think it's a big deal.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I think given the
just a
beta has
bonus.
to be limiting it by money versus by lottery, that seems like a great place to put the by money limiting. I do think the early access is more like it does feel icky. I agree with you, Asmon, though. Like it's the first couple days only. It's not like it's not going to
It's
really
not
affect
gonna
the end
ruin
of the
the game. Like,
expansion.
A lot of games do this. Like Hogwarts Legacy did this. Lost Ark did this. Like
Diablo
I
4.
think. Say what?
D4.
Diablo 4.
Diablo
Yeah,
4
the big
did
one.
it. Yeah, like that was not in the top 50 problems that Diablo 4 had. Right? So Starfield did this. Yeah. Like every game is doing this because it literally just prints money and it has no real effect on the game in the long term. And players don't choose to not buy the game because of it.
So even
If
though,
anything,
go ahead,
say,
Dorki.
there is one advantage though. One advantage is, so the past few expansion launch, there's been a massive server stability problem. I remember the beginning of Dragonflight was real bad. You couldn't even get on the Zeppelin. So one thing this at least helps with is splitting up the launch a little bit and making it much easier for people to actually play the video game in the first 2-3 days.
I don't. Okay, so yes, but wouldn't the servers just get absolutely crammed once max level stuff is finally available 3 days later, once everyone logs in and is leveling / is at max level at the same time? It might spread people out of the zones a little bit, but like I feel like probably largely a lot of that stuff will still happen.
I think that
I
you'll
don't know.
probably
Did it happen in Diablo?
you'll have some of it, but you'll definitely have like that sharp decline. And even if somebody is logging in daily, they're probably going to log in daily like for 18 hours to get to max level for like the first 2 or 3 days, and then they'll scale back to 8 hours. So like by that point, you'll have half of the people doing 18 hours and the other half doing 8 hours rather than everybody doing 18 hours. So I do think that like the staggering out releases does make sense and it is a good argument. But I just think that, you know, for a lot of people out there, it just feels icky. You know, like Dratno said,
it's literally the
like,
Squidward meme. You guys know the Squidward meme with him like looking out the window and it's
two people
Patrick
having
and
fun. Yeah.
Sponge. But yeah, that's people having fun, and you know, you're just getting FOMO'd out at ass
Oh my
because
god!
you don't get to play the game.
When and I say this as a streamer who has very rarely gotten these things, but sometimes has. It's like the feeling of when like there's this really
I hate that,
good
dude.
game you want to play, and then like streamers are randomly playing it a day earlier than everyone
Goddamn
else.
streamers, man.
That makes me want to die. I hate
I
that so
hate
much. I wish
streamers
no
so
game would
much,
ever
yeah.
do that.
I
Unbelievable.
completely fucking agree. And this is as somebody who gets in on a lot of those. I really
Same.
don't like the early access for only streamers or something like that, especially whenever it's an anointed few, right? Like
hate
only
it.
a handful of people that have good relationships with the company get the ability
Yep.
to play the game. I feel like it's very preferential treatment. It feels bad if you're not being invited. And if you are being invited, you have like this big advantage over other people that's kind of not fair. It just sucks. Yeah,
Yep.
I wish that the release
and
was
even
the
if
same
it's
for everybody.
even if it's fair, like it's like a game where you can get ahead and stuff. I just think it's just if you're just looking forward to a game, it's just a total fucking buzzkill to go on Twitch and see 4 people playing it early. But the other thing I want to say too is while we're saying yes, Blizzard's going to do this, everyone that's going to complain about it is still going to buy the game. So they're just like doing their capitalist thing. I do think it's important to voice your frustration at it anyway, though, because that really matters with these companies. If you just are, if everyone's reasonable, it's like, oh yeah, well, this makes sense. They're going to make their money and stuff like that. And then you don't actually fucking whine and complain about it. What you're going to get is all these games, because you know what all of them want to do? Turn every single one of these games into a fucking gacha game where they're just a blood-sucking, like, mobile game where they're just making as much money as possible. And that's kind of happening in the East right now. And it's not happening over here because of the absolute crazy reaction they would get if they did do that, at least until all the kids that are currently indoctrinated into it get older. But yeah, they're you got to watch out for that. You got to fight back.
I think it's as simple as the reason why they're not doing it is because it doesn't make money. And also, we talk about them not doing it. What is FIFA Ultimate Team if not a gacha?
It is a gacha. Those are
right.
I've played a few of those games. Those are I really hope that people who play those games realize they're just getting absolutely dog walked every year by these companies. Just they are just
characters.
they are siphoning their they buy the same character. It's not even like a gacha where like, you know, you played over like 4 years and you collect all these different things. They have them collecting the same characters and players every year. Crazy.
It's insane. And like, yeah, the recent 2K was like just it's like on Diablo Immortal level. Like it was nuts. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I just personally think that, like, yes, obviously developers care, but as a molder of store mounts ever since the inception of store mounts, and now they just keep making them, I am just so tired, man. I am so tired. It's like, if they're gonna do this, I either decide to buy it or not. But like, I will make it known that I don't like it, but man, I've never seen it matter before. It's sad.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we're chilling. I think we did a nice. This was an absolute banger. Thanks for coming on today. This was an awesome episode. I mean, I was thoroughly interested the entire time. I think a lot of the chat was as well. This was great.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun. Yeah, this was great. And I feel like we talked about a lot of stuff too, honestly.
Yeah, that was
we
absolutely
absolutely covered
packed.
a lot.
Yeah, we slammed out a bunch of content in 2 hours. Yeah, we won't.
Yeah.
For people who are watching this weekly, we didn't do a Patreon episode of the week this week because we just had so much to go over from BlizzCon. But you can find all the information about the Patreon stuff. We won't have an episode next week because of the race. I will be busy. But then we should be meeting the week after that, assuming the raid is over. If not, maybe like later that week or something. So we will be away from you guys for a week, unfortunately. And Dratnos, do you think we have any other things?
Nope, nothing there. Good luck, Frank. Congrats on getting to edit together this new scuffed version we're going to send you. Have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. And shout out Asmon and your audience. Thanks for really just an awesome talk today. So hopefully this is retail on its way back with the War Within, and we may have you back on in the future if there's any major WoW stuff. This was great.
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, yeah, I had a lot of fun, and if you want to have me back on in the future, I'm usually around, right? I mean, shit, playing WoW, talking about WoW, it's what I do, so it's okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a good
Oh wait,
time.
I have one question before we did.
Yeah.
Real quick. So I don't look at your chat, and I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to tell me. Okay,
I have my eyes closed.
Okay, what comes to your mind when I say succulent?
Cactus.
Fuck
But that's
me,
only
man.
because of Starfield that has the succulents that looked like cactuses. Because if it wasn't for that, I would think of something a lot more dirty.
I was thinking of Raw. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Bro, no.
You
guys
like
don't know
the Raul the
Raul?
Gluttonous from Waycrest Manor?
Yeah, he was like, succulent.
Okay.
That guy?
Love it.
Yeah, okay.
You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
I thought succulent was an adjective until
It is,
yesterday.
right?
Yeah,
That's
no,
what
it's
I
an
thought too.
adjective. I thought it was
Mhm.
just an adjective, and then my chat mentioned that it's like
also
this
a noun.
little cylindrical cactus thing.
Yeah.
And then I thought that was like a really niche plant, but apparently I'm like the only motherfucker on this planet that did not know a succulent was a plant.
I
What the
mean,
hell
yeah,
plants are people
I
looking
mean,
at?
there was a point where I didn't know narwhals were real. I thought they were fake. So don't feel too bad.
Me too, up until
That's like a whale,
solid
right?
3 seconds ago, yeah.
A
Hang
whale
on.
with like a spike on him, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this podcast was very succulent. Thank you
Mhm.
guys for the thank you for the time, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
All right, guys.
Yep.
I'll see you later.
GG.
Peace.
GG.
Yep.
Yeah.
Later.